Skyrim, A Sorcerer's Tale. 501, Chapter 117, Solstheim Wrap-Up. As I sat atop the towers of Raven Rock, legs dangling off the crenulations and the salty sea air whistling past me, I allowed my thoughts to drift through the events of the past 3 days. Our victory in Apocrypha was a muted one, and even if the sense of wrongness lightly suffusing the island disappeared, an event noticeable only by the attuned or able, the general populace remained unaware of all that had truly transpired. Were certainly all quite happy that the threat of Mirac was declared to be officially over and the island had been thoroughly cleansed by our forces, but their celebrations and relief simply seemed lackluster to me, as hypocritical as that thought may seem. Not that I was frothing at the mouth for the approval of the masses' mind. My own feeling of accomplishment surpassed anything they could have ever given me, and the fact Minthara wasn't quite as pissed at me after a while lulled me into a fine sense of contentedness. A feeling that would no doubt abandon me in mere days, but such was life, and I would frankly not have it any other way. Speaking of progress, I felt almost grateful towards Mr. Fried Calamari, because the harvest he sowed was bountiful indeed. Raven Dagoth Septim. Star 110 to 130. Dex 115 to 170. Vit 250 to 300. Mind 250 to 320. Mag 5,000 to 5,500. 27,500. Div 1,000 to 1,400. Lesser aspect plus fate. And the glorious advantages of living inside a semi-dream realm show themselves once again. It was a shame that growth tended to be so specific, because my physical abilities were far outstripped by my mental ones, but frankly, with how much I relied on magic, I would be confused if there weren't. That, and I could easily mold orichalcum with my bare hands at this point. It is not like I am not satisfied with my strength, especially since I can just buff myself whenever necessary. At the battles of both Thorn Pass and Apocrypha, I barely made use of my strength, relying on magic when it truly came to it, and using finesse instead of power during physical combat. And as much as I was barely touched by the Argonians and Hist, Mora's literal fucking nuke did wonders for making me imprint my survivability upon the world. The way of the cockroach was indeed still very strong with me. The massive growth in my aedric abilities did surprise me, however, a mere trickle after Thorn Pass I fully expected and accepted. It would me take years upon years to make any kind of progress, especially since the massive jump at Red Mountain. But apparently fate, and no, I will not apologize for the pun, had other plans. My interaction with Athelia's power had attuned me to the concept more than I originally thought, that is to say, anything beyond an absolute zero. The fact I could even see what she was doing should have already clued me in well enough, but I was understandably distracted at the time. The minor aspect still felt like a tiny speck that would allow me to A-B fuck with some minor probabilities, and with the subtlety of a particularly large brick at that. But combined with the extensive use seen by my anti-outsider aspect alongside the one of defiance, it saw my Aedric Magicka reserves skyrocketing. That I did so while facing one of the most terrifying beings in this existence probably helped. Absently, my mind trailed to the unbound trait sitting silently in the core of my being. Something told me I owed a lot of my progress to that unassuming line of text, a debt that would only increase as time went on. Good thing I got it through honest, hard scheming, or I might have started feeling bad. Scorch looks down from atop his perch. Truly, my humility is the most impressive in the whole world. I nod solemnly. He stares at me with utter disgust in his eyes, and then promptly jumps off the tower head first. Angsty-ass bird, I snort as he simply sinks into the wet dirt below, drying it and then turning it to ash in the blink of an eye. Oi, Scorch, I call. What? He chirps back, not even bothering to get out of his hole. You never got to eat Mora's eyes, I cackle at him. Fuck! Thoughts trailing from my progress as I ignore the pouty pile of poultry, I cannot help but smirk as I remember our departure from Tel Mithrin. Flashback. The morning after Apocrypha's sundering had me meeting with all the magi who helped me out with the portal, the lot of them easily accepting a simple bribe of enchanted equipment so they wouldn't ask questions they didn't need answers to. They were probably banking on the fact they'd find out later anyway, and one did not become a centurial master of magic without learning some patience. Not that them knowing was the issue really, but them talking about it would be annoying. Marwyn was both different and not when it came to his own desires, and his need for gear that would help him with his lack of magicka superseded any curiosity he may have held. That only left Neloth outside of my inner circle, and the old elf was, to put it bluntly, still fucking livid about my decisions. And the jaw. He stood in front of me, barely holding back his rage-filled trembles as he glared at me, no doubt hoping I would spontaneously combust. So, Master Neloth, I smirk at the cunt. What reward would you ask for your assistance? Fuck off and never return. He answers immediately, you have disturbed my peace, ruined years of effort, and humiliated me before the fools of my house. I have no need for your filthy fucking rewards. He manages to nearly stop his flinch as Akula Khan leans towards him but doesn't relent. Ah, but where is the fun in that? I smirk. No, I am afraid the picturesque sights of Tel Mithrin have grown too dear to me to forever abandon. Irritating him was just too fun. Poor fucker was almost boiling with rage. Come now, I drawled. I am sure you can think of something I can offer. Why, I may even be feeling particularly generous. How generous exactly? He turns guarded, generous enough to consider requests I otherwise wouldn't. I spread my arms and smile innocently. Neloth actually turns pensive at that, hesitating as poorly hidden desire warred with rage and hatred. But as always, greed would overcome all, and he spoke. Tell me of your odd power, the one that allows you to go beyond mere magic. Knew it. So long as you swear on your name that once I reveal the secret, you will forget all your grudges and not fight my authority ever again. He frowns, almost refusing out of hand, but failing to notice me lacing my voice with my aspect of deception. Very well, you have my oath. Excellent. I rub my hands and nearly cackle as I see him still in realization. The answer to your question, Neloth. Even the other magi were listening in closely now, is the Sijic path. My knowledge must have utterly astounded him. So shocked was he that his eyes turned completely bloodshot and then rolled back into his head, a tiny trace of foam appearing at the edges of his mouth as he fell onto the ground unconscious. Best part of it all? I didn't even lie. Present time. I allowed myself a cruel grin, good times. Of course, our arrival to Raven Rock was met with much greater fanfare than the silent goodbye the residents of Tel Mithrin gave us, even as a good number of them prepared to leave Neloth's oppressive rule. Hell, even now, 3 days later, some of the resident elves were still in a celebratory mood. They weren't quite as bad as Nords when it came to feasting, but the second councillor very nearly had to make an emergency order of supplies from the mainland. As the heavily stressed Dunmer population finally internalized, they were no longer under treat and proceeded to celebrate appropriately. First Councillor Lerrell surprised me by breaking his vaunted Redaran austerity and outright telling his second to simply pay out of his personal coffers if it came to it. The Mer was not blind and knew his rise would be coming now that the island had been cleansed and he had not proven a disappointment to his hortator. And that was without mentioning the freshly undead-free ebony mine he now administered, free of any and all East Empire company meddling under my personal auspices. The Morwains would be on the rise in the House of the Warrior so long as they remained competent. Minthara had no desire to watch me organizing the city and holding the speeches, so she joined the rest of the army with her retinue and helped with cleansing the rest of the island. Or at least that was the excuse. I didn't miss how she borrowed my maps of the small island off of Solstheim's northeast, exactly where a barrow rumored to hold great treasure stood, and the only other Dwemer ruin that just happened to be on the way there. Can't wait to catch her swimming in gold and immortalize the moment. It shall be glorious. Good blackmail was oh so hard to come by these days. Filing that image for later, I focused on another memory of the past days. For while Raven Rock was the most important polity on Solstheim, others also noticed the shift in the air, even if their gratitude could have gone without all the reservation. Flashback. Storn Cragstrider stood beside me atop a hill overlooking Raven Rock, his daughter and a dozen of their fellow tribesmen sitting around a fire some 100 or so meters into the nearby forest. enjoying the smell of roasting deer and chatting without a care in the world. "It is over then," he muttered. "Herma Mora no longer threatens Solstheim, and Mirak's foulness has been put to rest. You and the Dragonborn have the Skal's eternal gratitude." Unable to hold back a snort, I shake my head. "I doubt gratitude is the only thing you are feeling for me right now. Such are the challenges laid before us by the Allmaker." He inclines his head, hiding his bitterness well. "You have faced a great evil to protect us, even if it was merely out of coincidence that you did so, and you went out of your way to not seek the power to bend the will of others when you could. Not many would have done the same." "High praise from you, shaman," I hum, and do not bother correcting him about Minthara's devouring of Mirak's knowledge. "Deserved praise," he corrects simply. "For all your posturing and bold authority, you appear to be at your heart an honorable man, and whether I like it or not, my people will inevitably fall under your full authority." He sighs. "At least I can rest easy, knowing that those who come after me will have a bright future, even if it will not be one according to traditions." "So quick to give up, eh?" I quip. "Heroic a figure you may strike, but a child you remain." He huffs, though I do sense a bit of amusement hidden deep in there. "Already we have reunited with our brethren from Thirsk Meadhall, and already our young spend their time brawling and hunting with them, now that the hall's warriors have found their courage." He exhales a long puff of cold air. "I am not blind, and neither am I so stubborn as to refuse reality. I will do as the shamans before me did, and preserve the knowledge of my people." He pauses and slowly turns to face me. "But I would also like to share it with you." "Oh." I quirk an eyebrow as he pulls out a scroll of goatskin. "It is not much for someone like you, I know this." He offers the scroll, "But I hope our understanding of the land we walk will aid you in protecting others as you did us." Well, damn, now I can't make fun of him anymore. Present time. The poor old man was watching his culture slowly begin their path to losing their identity and took it like an absolute champ. A rare thing for a priest, but for all my waffling, he did prove his integrity many times over in the short time I had known him. Storn and his little tribe thus carved into my memory, I pulled out a sketchbook, replaying another memory as I started drawing a certain tree of stone. And speaking of the tree of stone, Mephala was being rather coy about things recently and kept delaying our meeting while being all smug and annoying like a certain someone. She probably expected me to press the issue, but frankly, even if Mora somehow managed to survive my Daedra life force enhanced storm of steel, he wouldn't be an issue for thousands of years. Doubtful as the outcome was, she wasn't panicking, and she definitely warned me if I was about to get Daedra ganked. So I wisely chose not to let her live in my head, rent-free, and simply wait for her to contact me. Knowing her MO, I would probably appreciate whatever she did and be suitably irritated by the manner of it all. And boy, does the fact I genuinely enjoy our little back and forths irritate me sometimes. I rolled my eyes and shook the thoughts away, resuming my little daydream. After the pack of werewolves Sarana had befriended, for the lack of a less offensive term, were given their chance to be useful as hunters and foresters, I was given the distinct privilege of talking to the now fully coherent, if still thoroughly traumatized vampire I rescued from Apocrypha. The man was bombastic in his presentation and far too boastful for his own good, but I couldn't help but like the little shit, even if he tended to switch to third person sometimes. He was scared shitless of Sarana as well. The moment he learned what happened to Harkon, and the obvious underlining threat, he started slinking back the moment she so much as glanced at him. Sadly for his peace of mind, I wasn't about to babysit him as he got his bearings. Me freeing him from both Mora and Bal was gift enough for his cooperation, I think. Also, what kind of a name was Tredro Al anyway? Must be some weird Yokudan remnant or something, because that didn't sound one bit Tamrielic. I was quite certain of that much. The utterly inane consideration of mine stopped as I felt my orb trademark buzzing, the usual suspects finally voicing their curiosity, likely delayed by Shalazar for his own no doubt very mysterious reasons. I scrolled past the arcane forum that was used by most of those blessed with an orb and unlocked the one reserved for the inner circle of the college Archmagi, the glorious quarrelsome quintet. Channel Shadow Wizard Money Gang. Ho? Skeletor, which one of you humorless hacks changed the name again? Lizard Wizard, fear not, colleague mine, for I have deemed this to be the optimal title of our most cumbersome company. Former paper pusher, it is very fitting at least. Skeletor, I am so done with you people. I cast fist. What could you possibly mean by you people, young man? Former paper pusher, yes, Phineas, whatever could you mean? I thought we were more than labels to you, but it seems in your undeath has made you stop thinking of us as people. For shame. Lizard Wizard, indeed most senior of skeletons, your disdain disappoints your most devout companions. Skeletor, Skeletor, just get on with it already. Former paper pusher, you are no fun. Skeletor, I will be fun when you all stop ganging up on me like children with parental issues. Now are we going to discuss whatever accursed thing Dagoth inflicted on Oblivion, or keep showering me with shitty alliterations? Big D, Supervisor. I cast fist. Welcome back, young man. I hope you are in good health. Big D, it is good to hear from you again, Master Tolfdir, and yes, I am quite well. Big D, Savos, I can feel you thinking it. Don't you dare. Former paper pusher, me? Share incriminating information for my base amusement? Never. Big D, you better not. I cast fist. So long as you are well after all is done, we will be satisfied. Damn, Grandpa is too wholesome. Skeletor, yes, hearts and rainbows and all that. Please leave such tripe for later. What happened in Oblivion? The entire damn realm has barely stopped shaking. Lizard Wizard, and what a splendiferous shake it was. Former paper pusher. Yes, as much as I understand not wanting to spread rumors, some confirmation would be nice. You've had more than enough fun being vague and smug for now. Big D, no need to needle me about it. Mora is dead and Apocrypha is gone. Probably. Former paper pusher. I suspected as much, but it is still ridiculous to read. Lizard Wizard, as expected of my student. Skeletor. I cast fist. Skeletor. I am finishing the homunculus prototype tonight and getting drunk. Undeath is overrated if I have to be sober for this shit. I cast fist. I do believe I will be joining you. Big D. Your awe is noted. Skeletor, fuck off. Skeletor has disconnected. I cast fist, and I was just about to offer him a special brew I had imported just for him. How sad. Skeletor has connected. Skeletor, oh shut up you old fart, I am not that fragile. I cast fist, but of course my friend. A long pause stretches before the next message. Skeletor. I do have to ask though, why go so far? Mora is usually one of the more reasonable parasites, even if that tends to lead the fools into becoming seekers down the line. Or it used to anyway. Big D, I came into possession of certain knowledge he desired. I was not keen on sacrificing it to him, and he took exception to that. Big D, naturally I then took exception to his exception and decided I wasn't about to spend centuries warding off his subterfuge and simply cut the rot at the source. Now I will never have to worry about his bullshit again. I cast fist. Quite the ruthless decision. Skeletor. A bloody understandable decision is what it is. Power prerequisite notwithstanding. Mora was a being of great power, but if he threatens someone with the capability of ending him, he only has himself to blame for being such a big threat. I cast fist. I was not admonishing our young friend. Do note that I have lived long enough to see the cruelty of Mora 100 times over. Big D, it was a decision I came to rather quickly, and one I was certain of like none other, even if the execution took a while. Lizard Wizard. Most inspiring, my illuminating student, but be wary. The denizens of the sea between Nirn and Aetherius now know you are able to play on their board instead of merely dancing off of the spider's web, and they will fight you all the more if you threaten them. Former paper pusher, I fully expect a pact to be formed for whenever you try a repeat of Apocrypha. Big D, I am well aware they will be cautious now, and as much as I'd like to find a way to enter the colored rooms and murder Meridia, showing I am not to be trifled with will have to do for now. Skeletor, Daedra used to be unreachable beings of terrible power, you know? Big D, are you implying I am not an unreachable being of terrible power? Phineas, how very rude. Skeletor, something tells me that is not a jape, and for once I am not curious about the answer. Big D. Wise, cowardly but wise. Skeletor, right. Big D, tales of my prowess aside, any interesting news from the college? Skeletor, nothing you haven't found out when you passed through goo. I cast fist. That isn't entirely true, my friend. Young Feralda has been making impressive progress with both her alteration and restoration studies. We may have another joining us once she proves herself and if she is willing. Skeletor, wasn't she insultingly content with her place for well near a century? Lizard Wizard, something has lit a fire within the thunderous trainer of ours. Skeletor, I don't suppose you're about to tell us? Lizard Wizard, no, I don't think I will. Former paper pusher, 5,000 septims, she makes it in 3 months. I cast fist. My belief in her efforts is greater, she will do it in 2. Skeletor, you are on, my bet is on her relapsing into her old useless mindset. Lizard Wizard, you are most cruel, colleague mine. My bet is... Former paper pusher, nope. I cast fist, absolutely not. Skeletor, fuck no. What a bunch of cunts. Lestats for your enjoyment. Raven of Great House Dagoth and Imperial House Septim. Race Ashen Elnofe. Age 21. STR 130. Dex 170. Vit Treundre. Mind 320. Mag 5,500, 27,500. Div 1,400. Greater aspects, anti-outsider Ash. Lesser aspects, mortality, defiance, deceit, fire life, fate. Skills, Mage, Destruction Master, Elemental Malleability. Restoration Master, Revivification. Alteration Master, Conjuration Expert, Summons List, Scorch, Shackled Reach, Skittering Swarm, The Changed Ones, Enduring Hatred, Broken Glacier 20 out of 50. Mysticism Master, Sight Beyond Sight. Illusion Master, Psionics. Enchantment Master, Dwematech Master. Potion Craft Adept, Master Tongue. Warrior, Sword Expert, Pole Expert, Dagger Expert. Thief, Expert Sneak. Abilities, Ancestral Summon, Racial. Magnus's Gaze, Divine Blessing. Traits, Heart of the Mountain, Immortality and Max Fire Affinity. Lorcanson, Divinity Source, Domains of Lorcan. Raven's Reticence, Anti-Outsider Divine Power. Ashen Constitution, Lesser Invulnerability. Sunfire Bond, Scorch, Nascent Phoenix. All-Seeing Third Eye, Greater Dunmer Paragon, Greater Falmer Paragon. Honored Nordic Paragon. Unbound Dover Thur. Mephalah's Blessing, Chosen. Deceit. Kind's Blessing, Healing. Mehrunes Blessing, Destruction, Hope. Oriel Akatosh's Blessing, Time and Sun. Zenithar's Blessing, Crafting, Perfectionism. Azura's Blessing, Mysticism. Boethia's Blessing, Warfare, Equipment. Sharmat's Reach, 5 times Magnification. Magnus's Gaze buff, Emergency Teleport. Dragonfell Amulet, Time Resist. Vestments of the Blasphemer. Divinity buff, Bloodline Locked, Weightless Plate, 1000% Mag Regan, 500 Mag Spell Absorb, Emergency Ethereal Time Slow. Mercy's End, Blasphemy's Stick, Enchantment to Spell Conduit. War Crown of Kogaruan, Shade Upkeep, Thum Buff, DMG Resist, Fear Aura. The Blade of Blasphemy, Vorpal, Anti-Undead, /Daedra, Rule Breaker. The Shroud of Raven, Supreme Magical Stealth, hides the soul perfectly. Oriel's Bow, Anti-Evil, Sun-Hallowed Arrow combo. The Mortal's Razor, Life Force Stealing, Reality Twisting, Critical Destruction, Cursed Wounds. Surge, Mega Magic Stick. Void's Blink, Conceptual Weak Point Finder. 502. Chapter 118, Winddown. General POV. Captain Fridvar of the Jagged Crown felt his fingers nervously tap the bulwark of his ship as the small army disembarked onto the docks of Winterhold. Even days after he was both repeatedly healed and had all the time to rest, his heart would begin beating harshly at the slightest rise in sound. He was making good effort in hiding it from his crew, but he knew that before long something would break. Unfortunately, for all the authority of being the captain of the High King's personal flagship brought, there still remained people whose scrutiny he could not avoid. Captain, the Hortator of Morrowind, greeted him quietly. "Your Grace." Fridvar bobbed his head. "What brings you here?" Those far too understanding eyes pierced into him, as they always did, at first. The elf turned away. "I wanted to thank you for your services, but it looks to me I might need to thank you for the sacrifice as well." Noticing his right hand shaking, Fridvar harshly stamped it down with his left and grit his teeth. "Comes with the job." He affirmed more to himself, "No need to fret when you've faced far worse." "Ah," Raven snapped his fingers, "and the problem magically goes away." The Nord felt his face heat up slightly against the sea winds, nearly sputtering before he forced himself to simply glare at the city docks. "I am not trying to ridicule you, Captain." The elf shook his head and leaned on the bulwark as well. "My own first experience with shouts was not quite as terrible, but getting slammed into a wall by a Draugr should still count, no?" Seeing him barely so much as twitch at the mention, Fridvar forced his own reaction down, lest he shame himself. "What are you getting at?" The elf didn't seem to care about his harsh tone and merely shrugged. "I'd have probably gotten traumatized myself if not for my rapidly growing power." Raven rose his hand to forestall him. "And so for your service I'd like to offer you a small boon." All Fridvar could do was stare dumbly as he was handed a small roll of parchment holding a singular rune he recognized as belonging to the dragon tongue, and a long line of text below it, I. He went to refuse but found his words leaving him. Sometimes the best way to deal with terror is to surpass it. Raven clapped him on the shoulder. Besides, Torrig could always use more power to his loyalists. Fridvar gulped as he began skimming the scroll, and by the time he turned to thank the elf, he had already disembarked and joined his entourage. Raven's point of view. The ascent to Winterhold proper had already been cleared of snow before our arrival. The many sailors and dockworkers stopping their work as we passed them by, soon joined by the citizens themselves who had somehow already managed to scrounge up a minor festival. Damn rumor mill surpassed even the gods, and it was only going to get stronger. As I watched Minthara beaming at the greeting and hesitantly accepting the gifts offered, my mind went back to the conversation with Fridvar. The good captain was someone I had grown to respect over the recent weeks. His reaction to the instant deaths of a massive chunk of his crew and obvious PTSD notwithstanding. The man was skilled, hard-working, a good leader, and most importantly, loyal to Torrig and through him to the Empire. And losing him to something like this would have been a massive waste, doubly so for what was coming. Oh, I was certainly aware of the hypocrisy of letting his crew suffer without a care. But I could not save everyone, nor would I ever wish to. Fridvar would either fall into the pit of despair or come out of the experience far stronger, and I would profit from it. Was it incredibly foolish to begin silently spreading knowledge of the voice? Quite possibly. Dare I say it was downright idiotic on some accounts, but innovation did not come from hoarding information, and even if it happened decades later, a certain number of people would inevitably come up with new and interesting ways of using the voice, and I would once more profit from it. What of the greybeards, you ask? Nords may respect tradition, but even that can only stretch so far, and after the death of Alduin, everyone and their mother dreamt of using the voice in their quiet moments, and many would fall to the temptation, no matter the peer pressure they would be under. But sadly, those schemes would have to wait their decades out, as I had more important things to do, like greeting Asser and going through all the motions of being the conquering hero. At least I didn't have to deal with the near worship Minthara was receiving. Not in this place at the very least. Unbelievable, I hear Minthara's amused mutter as she looks down through one of the windows of the Sea Ghost's respite bathhouse. What is it? I open one of my eyes, a bit miffed at having my water nap interrupted. No riots, I hope. If you count all the taverns in the city running out of mead a riot. She shrugs and plops down into the heated water. Truly, I drawl, a dreadful fate for any Nord. Good thing they were already expecting us then. She smirks before shaking her head. But no, that is not what I was talking about. She points her thumb at the window. We've barely been here for a few hours, and a trade ship has already departed for Solstheim after loading up on food and basic supplies. Huh, you have to respect the decisiveness. I chuckle, not one bit of hesitation to grab the new opportunity. A quick scry confirmed it was a captain I had worked with before. Probably had the good sense to trust my reputation to bring him wealth as it did once before. Best part is they will definitely profit massively. She points out as she allows herself to sink to her chin. Morvain was already complaining about raw resources before we left. I was the one who had to listen to all that. I pretend shudder, all you did was happily count your newfound treasure over and over, like an over-enthusiastic magpie. You are just jealous, she sniffs at me. My ensuing look is as dry as the desert. My vaults are larger than this building. She doesn't miss one beat. Our vaults, dear. Naturally, not being petty in the least, I send a current of electricity through the water, laughing my arse off at her surprised squeak, even as I was tackled below the surface. With an offended pout, Minthara once more tries taming the still electrified bits of her hair, all of it useless as the stubborn tangle simply jumps up a second later, making her do it all over again, vibrating in her seat as she held herself back from smacking me in full view of the room. Around us, the respite was loud with noise and music, the band I had hired so many years ago making a respectable effort of it, even if Marco would no doubt have managed better. Not that the little shit would ever hear me say that aloud. I could see the festive atmosphere practically draining the tension of some of our followers, and even Skirnir, who had gone through a resurrection of mine only recently, looked like he was comfortable within his own skin again, now that he was surrounded by his people in their natural state. No matter how good I got at it, the soul of a non-mystic was not meant to be leaving their body, despite how fun the idea was on paper. Out of the corner of my eyes, I noticed the newest batch of college students all joined with their older colleagues. The striking figure of an inebriated Ulf the Terrible looming over them as my dark apprentice spoke to them in dramatic, hushed tones about the upcoming conquest of Tamriel. That some of the bright-eyed youths took him seriously nearly made me slam my head into the table, but I persevered. This time, my own people were, as was their wont, far more contained in their relaxation, content to simply enjoy the moment of relative peace, even if some of their banter inevitably ended up on house rivalry and the usual dick-measuring. No, Sadras, just because one of you got eaten by a dragon doesn't mean your entire regiment gets to be called dragon slayers. I hold myself back from actually berating them and let my gaze drift about as my meal arrives. Hold on a second. Why was Davos the traitor drinking filthy leaf juice? This will not star. A shrouded figure sitting in front of me saved the traitor's soul, Minthara having decided to go and greet her old college colleagues a few moments earlier and thus leaving the two of us alone. Why, if it isn't my favorite boner enthusiast? I greet the greater lich with a smirk. You are not nearly as bright as you think you are. Phineas makes sure his illusory expression remains blank, but I see the skeletal scowl behind it. I pretend to hide my smirk behind my mug of brandy, taking an elaborately long slurp of my favorite drink before ever so slowly lowering it and lighting up a death stick. So how can I help the Honourable Archmage of Winterhold? I ask after an obnoxiously long puff. He doesn't answer immediately, instead taking a cautious look over the gathered crowd before turning back to me with a newfound fire burning in the pits of his eyes. We are finishing it tonight, he declares, unable to hide his excitement behind even his undeath. Finally managed to work it out, eh? I quirk an eyebrow before smirking smugly at him. Or did someone else do it for you? If he had the organs for it, he'd be rolling his eyes. Oh, come off it, you arrogant bastard. The prototype is almost done, and everyone is waiting for you. You didn't want to start without me, I ask breathlessly, while batting my eyelashes. How delightfully generous of you. He actually shudders at this. Tolfdir kept yammering on about you being part of the project from the start. He looks away and scoffs, not like I wanted to listen to your tripe any more than I have to already. Oh, so you do care. I clap my hands excitedly. Let's get going then. Wouldn't want you to miss out on the party. He nods and gets up, waving for me to follow, a question. He speaks up after I signal to the others that I'd be leaving for a while. Ask away, O skeletal sovereign. I offer a mocking bow as I toss away the ashes of my death stick trademark. Did you? He hesitates, looking around with a bit of paranoia. Did you get anything useful well, before I murdered our dear friend, Hermaeus Mora? I ask him loudly, causing him to jump and yelp as he rounded on me. He visibly held himself back and cast a detection spell, actually deflating as he realized we were under an anti-attention illusion. You are bloody insane. And you bloody love me for it. I snap my fingers and wink. But to answer your question, I did indeed manage to get some interesting reading material before it all evaporated. Skeletor Sr. perks up and begins greedily rubbing his hands. Oh sure, I may have been fighting for my very soul, but that didn't mean I was going to miss out on all the loot. Just because Mollusk Supreme was pissed didn't mean everything in his domain simply disintegrated, and the thousands of books currently languishing in my inventory should be grateful to be liberated from such an irresponsible owner. Maybe I was the magpie all along. Nah, that is impossible. I didn't hoard after all. Do ignore the vault. The chamber atop the Hall of Refinement was brimming with even more wards of all kinds than usual as we entered. The concentration of magic in the air so potent, I felt the slightest resistance to my steps as we passed them. Within awaited the usual suspects, everyone from my fellow Archmagi, and excited for an undead Marwyn, and to my surprise Nerevar Serana and Valerica Volkihar of all people. Ah, I nod, so that is how you managed to get it done so quickly. I ignore Phineas's grumbles as I approach the aforementioned vampire matriarch, Lady Valerica. I grin, always a displeasure. Dagoth. The disdainful chill of her tone had still not left her, it would seem. You've certainly been busy. Always am, I am afraid. I shrug helplessly. Though I will admit, I am surprised you left your island. She doesn't react visibly. Favors and assurances were offered. Is her simple answer, sure you didn't take control of her, Phineas? I jab my elbow at the scowling skeleton. Would probably make dealing with her easier. He takes a step away from me and wisely nopes out of the conversation. Serana sighs in exasperation, and finally, this time Valerica does react, left eye twitching as she contained her irritation. I had hoped rule would make you more mature, but it would seem it merely emboldened you. And irritating you shall always be a pleasure. I grin, taking far too much enjoyment out of provoking her. She was a piece of shit, and even if we were allied, I still did not like her one bit. But that is not why we are here, sadly. She could wait. Finally, Phineas drawls and steps up to the tarp-covered slab in the chamber's center. Tolfdir drags in a large enchanted board, sprawling diagrams spread on its surface, detailing enough about the human body to challenge a third millennium surgeon, with the inevitable effects of the existence of magic on top of it. Shalazar summons an entire armoire's worth of potions and tinctures, some of them feeling like genuine war crimes to my senses, even as the glorious lizard wizard practically juggled through them as he assembled everything we would need. Even Nerevar looked unnerved by some of the shit the Argonian brought out, though he did still hesitantly nod after examining the contents. Savos naturally fell into the overseeing role. No matter the actual titles, he was still far too used to it, and none of us wanted to bother. Oddly enough, I found myself standing opposite Valerica, the unamused vampiress tapping her far too sharp claws as I readied my own surgical tools. I never paid it any actual heed, but after having healed and disassembled so many people, being elbow-deep in guts didn't even faze me anymore. And the precise efficiency I had developed over the years made me far more qualified than any of the others in actually cutting and stitching the homunculus up. Phineas hesitated only briefly before he removed everything from his skeleton and laid atop the other half of the slab, cracking open his skull to make things easier for us as he did. The tarp was dragged off the prototype, and thus our work began. The body that greeted my eyes was a blocky abomination, a face that not even a grandmother would call handsome and musculature, that belonged in a shitty low-pixel game and not to an archmage of Winterhold. But it was a start. Begin incision. Savos cut through the silence, and soon his voice was replaced with the squelch of flesh. As my knives got to work, Valerica's oversight stopping me from making some very stupid mistakes as I instinctually tried following the usual nervous layout. The primitive wires spread through the homunculus were far more fragile than those of the weakest of Mer, their sole purpose being to confirm that they could work at all. Throughout the whole operation, I made sure to pay attention to Tolfdir's diagram, even as the old man narrated everything we were doing. I was already aware of most of it, but it never hurt to have a reminder handy with something as delicate as this. The entire assemblage was rudimentary enough to be called a meat suit and not a body, all the different organ systems being mere proof of concepts instead of their actual final forms. Everything was made to act as simple as possible, no matter how eager Phineas was to feel the world again. It felt like I was in some kind of a caricature of an operating theatre, a small hand drill twisting in my hands as I literally poked holes into the Phineas's skull before dragging the overlarge nerves through them, connecting them to the primitive brain within, tasked merely with transferring sensation and not actually processing information. It left me feeling all kinds of surreal. But in the end, hours later, as Nerevar spilled the final drop of a flesh-binding tincture, and Valerica and myself hit the body with a potent mix of restoration and necromancy, one to bind the flesh and the other to animate it, we saw the blocky abomination twitch and then levitate up into the air. Phineas landed on the cold floor feet first, nearly stumbling before Nerevar stabilized him by grabbing onto his shoulder. I held back the need to shout, "It is alive!" even if I'd still keep the thought a cherished memory. Phineas rasped in complete monotone, utterly uncaring for his current nakedness. "I can feel the air." He took one step forward and practically snatched the cup of water Tolfdir offered him. As he took a greedy gulp of the liquid, something told me the fact we skipped the tear ducts in this one was not an accident. "Well now," Tolfdir chuckled warmly, "if there ever was a deed worthy of Winterhold, this is it." "You forget the most important thing, colleague mine." Shalazar's squeak broke us from our wonderment as we all turned to look at him. "For us to call this a true success, we must offer the body the appropriate stress test." Phineas looked distinctly unwilling. And before long, we were all drinking from Tolfdir's personal stash. Oh sure, the homunculus may have suffered an almost immediate heart, liver and stomach failure cascading into a violent and painful death. But hey, progress was progress. 503, Chapter 119 of Tomes and Towers. "Come on, Phineas," I loudly tap on said lich's doors. "You knew it wasn't going to last for long. Stop sulking." The door is swung open with all the force of a hurricane, revealing the burning eyes of a furious undead. I am not sulking. Dust is thrown all over the place. You fools just had to rush me before I could get all the data I needed. Now I have to work on an entirely new prototype, and it will take me weeks. Liver poisoning really brought the mood down, apparently. Sounds like a skill issue. I dodge the flying vase and nearly flick his skull off with some light telekinesis. Now stop pouting and let me throw some books at you to make things easier. We will be leaving soon, and I don't want to take credit without actually contributing to the final product. He clenches his skeletal fists, vibrating on the spot before visibly forcing his anger down. Fine, what do you have for me? He doesn't bother telling me to follow him as he walks back into his chambers. Mentally searching through my inventory, my eyes land on a duo of downright fat tomes that I then summon with the snap of my fingers, the books landing on an empty table with a loud thud. Mender's Manual 14th edition. Phineas reads the first one aloud and gives me a dubious look. We are sitting on the 26th edition right now. What use is an older version? My scrying told me it would be useful to you. I shrug and point at the next one. Admittedly, this one feels like it will be far more useful, but sadly it will take some translating. Old Aliad script. Had he eyebrows, they would be raised as he grasped the closed tome. This could either be completely useless or my luckiest break yet. A few moments later, he very hesitantly leaves the book where it lay and casts a quick communication spell, and after only a minute of waiting a set of heavy steps, alerts us to a new arrival. Urag Groshub looked just as gruff and imposing as he ever did, his natural orcishness making him unreasonably broad, even if he spent the vast majority of his time sitting around in the Arcaneum of the college. And yet, for all the menace he projected, I could feel a tinge of cautious respect in him as his eyes landed on me. The Master of Conjuration was said to have a better connection to oblivion than most, and he could feel I had done something momentous, even if he could not identify it. "Urag," I greet him with a simple nod. Dagoth. He grunts back. Good to see you haven't forgotten your roots. Chuckling, I shake my head. I doubt I ever will, and point an open hand at the table. Alas, as much as I'd like to reminisce, our dear Archmage needs your help with translating this. He doesn't bother complaining and merely grunts once more before bringing out an even heavier tome that looked to be some kind of dictionary. One that after a quick scan I realized held every single known dialect of Aliad recorded. Big Orc Man does not fuck around, Scorch whistles mentally. Urag spends some 10 minutes alternating between leafing through his book and staring at the title of my tome, rapidly narrowing down his search before nodding to himself and saying, "Looks to be Royal Aliad, used by their highest nobility to differentiate themselves from the masses." Promising? Phineas nods, skeletal grin clear on his skull. Urag merely grunts once more and gets back work, his fingers slowly trailing the series of ancient symbols as they landed on specific words, causing him to speed up, even as he frowned at whatever he saw. Finally, he paused as his eyes settled on a final word and exhaled. The tome is titled Flesh as Clay, appears to be the journal of the personal flesh gardener of Umaril the Unfeathered. The same chucklefuck Pelinal Whitestrake ripped apart. I cup my chin, eyebrows raised. The reasoning behind the title of Flesh Gardener needed no elaboration. The Aliads deserved their fates at the hands of Alessia's rebels. Indeed, Urag grunts. Not likewise gripped by our historical fascination, Phineas was stuck practically vibrating in excitement, or the undead equivalent of it, as he visibly held himself back from simply grabbing the book and trying to smash it into his skull. The reaction, for whatever reason, seemed to unnerve the orcish librarian. Hearing me clear my throat, Phineas snapped out of his fugue and turned to face us, pausing as he noticed Urag's look. "Don't stare at me like I'm about to follow those fools in their time-wasters. The Aliads may have been skilled, but they were complete fucking idiots when it came to making use of those same skills." His skull twists into a scowl. The mere implication of it makes me want to break something. "I couldn't stop you even if I wanted to," Urag states bluntly, not even the slightest hint of shame in his voice. "Just make sure this doesn't fall into untrustworthy hands." The Lich gives him a scathing look that may as well be screaming, "Who the fuck do I look like to you?" "Don't worry, Urag." I chuckle. Something tells me the results are going to be far more benign this time around. The orc grunts and nods. "The only reason I didn't immediately burn the damn thing is that I trust you all. Don't make me regret it." He doesn't bother waiting for our answer and strolls out, dictionary left behind. The sheer balls on this man. Bloody orc still scares me. Phineas drawls. A thought occurs. I hum. Why hasn't he been invited to our little society yet? "Ask Tolfdir," Phineas shrugs. "Green bastard probably doesn't want to bother." "Fair," I snort. "Probably should keep him in mind considering the age of some of the books I got." Shaking my head, I look to the Lich, slowly inching towards the book. "I see you aren't going to be resisting your temptation anytime soon. See you later, Phineas." I wave and turn to leave. "Off with you." He waves his hand at me dismissively. "I will inform you of any spells I come up with from this one." What a terribly shy fellow. A short stroll later, I found myself standing within the college's northern garden section, the trio of Volkihar vampires arrayed before me as they prepared to leave for their island castle. "Do be sure to visit when you have time," Sorana says with a small smile as she steps back from our hug. "The castle actually feels livable now." "Now that is an unexpected thought," I chuckle. "Hopefully they manage to get the blood out of the floors. And sure, I will be taking the time to visit Silrune Fell soon enough as well, so a quick jump over shouldn't be an issue." For only a moment, Valerica's face twisted into a scowl that could have curdled milk. "And you?" I snap my fingers at the vampire I dragged from Apocrypha. He blinks away whatever haze had taken him. "Yes?" "Do make sure not to blab about what happened, or we will be having issues." I threaten lightly before turning to Sorana. Ensure he isn't a monster and either recruit him or let him on his way. He did me a service, so killing him out of hand would be quite low. Sure, she doesn't even twitch at the implied command. "And what did happen to require such secrecy?" Valerica cuts in. Ask your liege if she feels like telling you. I shrug without facing her. She should know if she can trust her subordinates. Boy, how I love riling the bitch up. Hush now. Sarana hides her amusement behind the admonishment. You've had your fun already. As the lady commands, I bow dramatically and wink as I get up. Thanks for coming to our little adventure. Be sure to remember I actually owe you a favor for it this time. She cups her chin. I don't know. I might just keep it for later. As you like, I roll my eyes at the mischief in her look. Be seeing you. She waves a goodbye, and in a flash the trio disappears. Finally finished, Minthara approaches me as she sees them leave. Yup. I nod. You done packing yet? I've been done for hours now. She deadpans. We are all just waiting for you. Unable to contain a sigh, I mutter, this whole rulership thing is really starting to irritate me. Maybe I'd commiserate if you didn't practically groom me for it. She deadpans. I nearly miss a step at the wording. Why did you have to say it like that? She blinks, genuinely confused, but that is what grooming means. Preparing someone for a position. Right? I hold back the desire to kill myself on the spot and ever so slowly nod, right. And of course, Scorch decided now was the best time to imitate police sirens directly into my brain. This was a memory I'd never lived down, wasn't it? Shoving it all as deep into the void of my mind as I could, I sharply switched topics. Want to teleport back to Cyrodiil this time? She immediately groans, I thought you'd never ask. No way was I wasting time on marching when I had an entire library to go through. General POV. Titus Meade II kept his breathing steady as he felt the elixir settle in his stomach. The previous words of his bodyguard's commander slowly registering within his mind. They arrived early this morning, you say? Indeed, Your Majesty. The leader of the Penitus Oculatus nods. They arrived via portal in Dagoth Manor with a retinue of some 100 soldiers. Apparently the rest of their group was sent to Dagoth's hidden city to rest and recuperate. Caledon always did say relying on wards to be absolute was foolish. Titus said wistfully, did he comment on how likely they were to be breached by anyone else? About that. Morrow shifts awkwardly. Commander. Titus gives him a look. I asked you a question. Of course, Your Majesty. The man snaps a salute. It is just that. He looks away. Caledon has spent the past 3 hours following Dagoth around the White Gold Tower like a lost puppy, as the Prince Consort rearranges the warding scheme. Feeling just the slightest of headaches coming on, the Emperor of Tamriel ominously leaned forward. You are telling me that you failed to inform me of my home's protection being messed with? A part of him wanted to yell at the man, but experience had taught him that expecting Dagoth to be stopped by something as petty as propriety was a fool's errand. You were resting, Morrow's words came out as pre-practiced. The unsaid, it happens rarely enough, not going unheard, and the battle mage was, well, he looked just about ready to threaten to incinerate anyone who would interrupt the Prince Consort's work. Yes, that sounded about right. Caledon's wards are said to be some of the best in the world. Titus mutters mostly to himself. If he is acting fascinated by what he sees, then that must mean whatever my heir's husband is doing will benefit us greatly. Once more Morrow shuffles a bit. His automaton did enlighten us on the basics, sir. Titus waves for him to go on. Most of the technical terms went over my head, but in essence, he pauses, the wards should be at least 4 times as potent, with only those permitted capable of teleporting around the tower. And the city, the Emperor prompts. I asked much the same, Morrow nods, and the Prince was the one to answer, telling me that expecting to cover that amount of ground without using black souls. The mere mention makes him scowl with disgust, and hundreds of them at that was a fool's errand. He said merely making things difficult was the best siege defense reasonable. A shame that Titus reminisced in the privacy of his mind. An assurance against what the Thalmor did once already would have made me sleep easier. Well, he did also have something to say about that. Morrow's eyes light up with a vindictive glee. He said that stopping teleportation on that scale was near impossible, but redirecting it was something he'd be able to do with ease. Titus found himself blinking, redirecting it as in sending them to a trap instead of their destination. Indeed, your majesty. The commander of the Penitus Oculatus grinned, an expression soon mirrored by his emperor. Good, let him keep going then. What of my heir? Has she returned unharmed? Even if she was harmed, I doubt it would show. The commander's brow twitches with irritation, and the very idea that she should not rush to danger feels foreign to her. She is a Nord, and one of the dragon blood at that. Titus shrugs. I know, sir, it is just… Maro shakes his head. I find it difficult to make peace with the fact that my future charge is so beyond me that the very idea of protecting her is laughable. She can still not be everywhere, Titus points out, and there will always be work for the loyal and the brave, even if it may not be as glamorous as taking arrows for someone capable of ignoring them outright. True enough, Maro exhales, deflating slightly. What is she up to anyway? Titus asked with a curious glint in his eyes. The crown princess and prince consort have finally decided to make use of their apartments within the tower. Commander Maro answers, Her Highness has spent the last few hours. He coughs into his hand, dragging a vault's worth of trophies to the top of the tower, by hand. Titus' palm swiftly found its way onto his face. Well, at least gathering trophies is a sign of prestige. The uncomfortable look of his guardian made the emperor not ask the question for once. At this point, ignorance was bliss as far as he was concerned. 504, Chapter 120, Wind-Up begins. Raven's point of view. You sure you don't want to fashion something out of that? I ask, as Minthara rather uselessly tries attaching Alduin's horn to the tip of a tall pillar, could make for a powerful banner enchantment. She fails to reach the intended height and finally surrenders, levitating up like a normal person. I already have Jurgen's horn for that. She answers as she alters a few protrusions into the surface. Besides, I am not going to honor the bastard by making him useful. Spiteful, I hum. I approve. Of course you do. She snorts and simply plops back down onto the floor. So, she spreads her arms. What do you think? Holding back an eye roll, I turn to look at the admittedly massive first floor of the royal apartments granted to us. The whole thing being 3 floors in height and a good small manor's worth in girth. Yes, the white gold tower was that massive. What should have been a simple dining ballroom had been transformed from stoic opulence and masterful craftsmanship into a Nord warrior's wet dream. While a large table still occupied the center of it all, everything else had been overtaken by anything from utter junk to artifacts people would gladly murder for. Or get murdered for, as was the case right now. To say what happened to that one Sijic cuck was a mercy in comparison would be an understatement when compared to what would greet any little shit trying to infiltrate our new official home. The smug demigoddess didn't merely throw her stuff about, though. Oh no, she went and spent the entirety of last night organizing every single bit of loot into thematic collections. A full collection of all the most common weapons, armors, banners, and other heraldic items from the Stormcloak Rebellion, up to and including Ulfric's own Aventailed Orichalcum nasal helm. After that came a collection of forsworn trophies, preserved parts of different beasts, a downright insulting number of Thalmor items, all of them bloodied, etc., etc. 2 collections took the cake in my not-so-humble opinion, as a series of plinths had been molded by yours truly for all the Dragon Priest masks save for Varlox and Konarix. The former still being in use by the silent observer that was the jailer, and the latter being part of Minthara's own panoply, whenever she could be bothered to actually wear her damned helmet. The most prominent of all her themed collections, however, was a glinting gathering of dragon scales, one from each and every one of the poor fools who did not immediately bow down to her authority and were thus given their just dues. All of it topped by Alduin's own horn, which even now radiated the absolute dread of its previous owner. It certainly has. I pause just to annoy her character. Ass, she grumbles. You know you love it. Oh, I do. Don't get me wrong, I grin. It's just that I am currently too busy imagining a Thalmor coming in here. Chortling, I add, poor fuckers would shit themselves. Her eyes take on a mischievous glint as she cups her chin. Think we can invite your friend from the totally not embassy in the Elven Quarter for a visit? What was his name again? Narcissus, I remind her. Sadly, my friend hasn't been in the city for a while now. I doubt he died. He is too wily for that, but something tells me his diplomatic failure has him run ragged by his fellow Ultima. What a shame, she pouts. Now I can't get the idea out of my head. Just call some fools you want to intimidate later, I chuckle. Besides, I doubt dear old Titus is going to leave us to our own devices for much longer, especially after his poor battle mage had to sleep off a massive headache. Minthara actually shudders at the reminder, that man got far too fixated on what you were doing. Right, I will admit he was a tad too enthusiastic. I allow, but he is the battle mage, so begrudging him a chance to learn how to ward better would just be a dick move. Uh-huh, she deadpans. Definitely not because you want to irritate the part of the council that still annoys you. Me doing something so petty? I gasp and cover my poor heart, such betrayal from my own wife. Rolling her eyes, she goes to respond, but a loud series of knocks at the door interrupts us. The ever-armored head of a Kulakan looming inside, my master, the meatbag Duculus has sent a runner asking for yours and your consort's presence. I pretend not to hear the runners sputtering and nod at my servant. We will join them shortly. The automaton nods and closes the door. Your consort's Minthara mimics Akulakan's tone with a raised eyebrow. Raising one in turn, I merely ask, are you going to tell him not to call you that? She goes to immediately say yes, but then pauses and frowns. No, that sounds like a headache. Well then, I smirk cheekily and offer an arm. Shall we go, O consort mine? She rolls her eyes, but the smile doesn't leave her all the way to the council chamber. Rolling the tube of parchment, a very inconspicuous jackal, handed to me as I entered between my fingers, I offer a light bow to a very tired-looking Titus as he greets us, his counselors nodding along his words all the while. We have heard many rumors of what happened on Solstheim, some more outlandish than the rest. Titus looks at Minthara. However, all of them seem to agree that you have accomplished what you set out to do. Our victory was quite absolute. The smug dragon nods smugly. Solstheim should be a thriving trade stop before too long, and that is without mentioning the ebony mine. I notice Francis Vierre nearly speak up about the whole ebony monopoly thing of the East Empire Company, but it would seem that the recent activity had somewhat enlightened our dear Master of Commerce, because he failed to commit suicide by annoyed hortator. Will wonders ever cease? Yes, I am sure that a prosperous Solstheim will be somewhat useful in the future. Marshal Valenicus cuts in, but I still fail to see the reasoning behind investing imperial attention to a backwater like that, ebony mine or not. Holding back a downright devious chuckle, I answer, your failings are your own to consider. I grin as he glares at me. But to give you a slightly more palatable answer, some couples take a month to retreat after their wedding. I spread my arms, decided butchering the cult of an ancient dragonborn and his dragons was far more entertaining. Most of the councillors were rendered quite speechless by my declaration. Titus, however, merely groaned, as he was no doubt smacked by a big old headache, covering his face with his hand as he leaned on his elbows. Explain. Being gracious and unwilling to commit regicide via violent apoplexy, I let Minthara tell the tale, without mentioning the whole apocrypha business, of course. That is, Titus exhales slowly, quite the tale, and one that we should have been informed of in advance. Chancellor Duculus adds, with all due respect to the both of you, events of this magnitude are not something that can simply be waved off in favor of admittedly heroic adventurism. There is actually a good reason for that, Minthara chirps before the other councillors can interject. See, if we told you about it, you would be obligated to make some noise and thus inform our dear friends from the Dominion that something dangerous was happening. Some faces light up with realization, and so you decided to simply deal with it while pretending to go on a retreat. Duculus finishes for her. I will admit, as much as I dislike the idea of the last septim rushing into danger, it was an expedient solution. That, I raise my index finger, and none of you could have dealt with Mirac, no matter what you did. Yes, Titus frowns and looks to Minthara. The bend will, shout you called it. Q shudders of primal fear. a power capable of dominating even dragons. She nods seriously, one only resisted by someone of equal power in the voice. And this power, surprisingly, it is Admiral Al-Hakim that speaks up. It is gone. Forever? Showing absolutely no tells, Minthara nods. It will never curse the air of Nirn again. The Red Guard deflates in his seat, the rest of the council sporting relieved expressions as well. A blessing indeed, to have such a crisis happen without notice. Titus nods, no doubt happy to not have to deal with the stress of it all. And of course, an additional naval base for our supply lines is always welcome. He inclines his head ever so slightly in my direction. But, he straightens up, now that we have gotten our answers, doctored as they were, he gives Minthara a pointed look, to which she shows absolutely no reaction. Let us move on to the actual point of this gathering. Indeed, Your Majesty, Ducalus continues as Titus turns silent. The Thalmor have begun acting, slowly gathering their armies and training new reserves even as we speak. Their domains in Elsewhere and Valenwood have also begun their mobilizations, even if the actions of our agents have slowed their efforts somewhat. How quickly can we expect them to be ready, I ask. Full readiness will take them months still, by autumn at the latest. The Chancellor answers, but 4 of their veteran legions stand ready some distance from the borders even now, serving as gathering points for their auxiliaries. So they are ready for hostilities to break out but not to invade. I nod and hum, and our own forces. Valenicus clears his throat. With the return of the recently raised Skyrim legions, and not counting city garrisons and private forces, our numbers stand at a full 6 trained legions, 4 of them from Cyrodiil. The Bretons are of course going to be taking time to become strategically useful. Ducalus cuts in. I suspect the battles of High Rock will not be fought on the field, but through proxy. And our own proxy, Minthara prompts. The good King Uthred has already begun moving. The Chancellor nods. He informs us that his forays into Stormhaven have already began bearing fruits, though it will be months yet before he has the chance to subsume the territory. And the orc problem in Rivenspire, I prompt, feeling distinctly miffed about a certain part of the report I was given. Growing more violent by the day, Ducalus answers calmly, I suspect a warlord is likely to rise if something is not done about it, but King Uthred assured me that the opportunity to consolidate those lands is too great to nip it in the bud just yet. Some uncomfortable looks are shared, but none of us are quite stupid enough to gainsay that particular strategy, distasteful as it is. Very well, I nod, part of my thoughts still on the report. What of Hammerfell? At this, Titus scowls. The forebears have sent a scant few missives our way, but from what little we do know, dislodging the crowns without bathing the province in blood will be rather difficult with the Thalmor preparing as quickly as we are. Meaning all we can rely on is a number of volunteers, Minthara mutters. Quite, the Emperor agrees simply. Look at it this way. I speak up, drawing curious glances. No matter how disappointing it is that we will not be getting our hands on any Hammerfell legions, we all know how much the Red Guards hate the Thalmor. Having one of our flanks secured by forces that are at least neutral will allow us to operate with at least some security to our central supply lines. He has the right of it, Valenicus grunts, looking almost pained to agree with me. It will make any interference with our northern territories a nightmare for them, even if it will not actually stop them from trying. Attrition is our best friend in war, I point out. Exactly. He smirks before realizing who he had just agreed with, and frowning, speaking of numbers, he grunts, what kind of support can we expect from Morrowind? Many a curious councillor perks up at that particular question. Considering the border with Black Marsh, the large coastline, and the sparse population, I will have to leave the majority of my forces as a garrison. I answer without a care, and immediately raise a finger, but my most veteran warriors will gladly join us, so you can expect a good 30,000 Dunmer elites to be at our disposal. 30,000. The Marshal frowns. That is just slightly above a single legion. Ducalus clears his throat. 2 elven legions, Lord Marshal. Right. The Imperial nods. I suppose that will have to do. Their showing at Thorn Pass wasn't shameful at least. Why, thank you. I give him my most sickly sweet smile, and the poor man nearly recoils. A thought occurs. Minthara speaks up. What if I were to, once we are ready of course, begin hostilities by leading my dear brothers on a little adventure to one of those Thalmor Legion camps? Oddly enough, the idea of throwing some near 30 dragons on the enemy while they were clumped up didn't receive much resistance, at least until the fact the Crown Princess refused to not participate came to mind. The discussion derailed not long after that. The fact that we still had months to prepare had us going over anything between economics to legion tactics, to the integration of different races in the same fighting force, to something as inane as who to buy horses from for the supply trains. And through every single second of it all, I simply couldn't stop thinking about that damned report. The same one that stated Durek had simply picked his spear up one day and marched out of Jorvaska, going due west without bothering to explain a thing to anyone. Hopefully he would survive whatever quest he had undertaken. As much as I would have liked to help him out, I had my own concerns to consider. Mere months remained before the very fragile peace finally broke, and I had an entire library's worth of books to go through, dozens of spells to refine and straight up invent, and to finally take the time to make Akulakan the sibling I had promised him. Hopefully dear old Clavicus Vile wouldn't mind me playing around with Umbra too much. Oh, who am I kidding? I'd have to remind the little shit I made Oblivion my bitch before the day was out. 505, Interlude I, Part 1, A Narcissistic Adventure. General POV, months before Raven's Solstheim trip. Heavy breaths and heavier steps drowned in the noise of the rainforest as a lone figure trudged along what he believed may have at one point been a road, his legs barely keeping themselves upright as he fought for each and every gulp of air. Even the damned air of this place is wet, Kinlord Narcissus of Shimmerine complained in the safety of his mind. Veil of mist indeed. He rasped, willfully ignoring just how tired he was feeling. Shaking his head awake, he focused back on the road ahead of him, his eyes trailing in and out of focus as he did his best to pay attention to his surroundings. Unfortunately for the Ultima, he had never been in a place quite as loud as a rainforest, which is why he was far too slow in noticing his pursuer, as a striped dark blue feline pounced at him from atop a nearby branch, making not a sound as it cut into his robed flank. "Ugh!" Narcissus hissed and rounded on the beast, the pain nearly taking him out of the fight before his training kicked in, his eyes momentarily glowing as his hand lashed out and promptly pierced the large cat's eye with a spike of ice. Damn animals. He scowled and absently began healing the worryingly deep cuts. He felt his vision begin to swim, but shook the nausea away. Keep it together, Narcissus. Can't be dying before you ensure Neris's safety. Thus motivated, he checked on the despairingly small room his magic could carve within Oblivion, wincing as he quickly understood that the waterlogged hardtack within would not last him long. The water was blessedly more abundant, and freezing the eternal mist around the island he was on would not be a great challenge for an expert of magic such as he. But his main focus was not on his supplies. He could survive on restoration magic long enough, but on the folded parchment safely tucked away within a metal tube he'd prepared just for this occasion. His identification, the sole item that would potentially save his life, and his only way home. Narcissus sighed, looked down at the path before him, and then back at the cat. "Well," he tried to keep the scowl from his expression, "you did offer yourself up." Done healing himself and accepting that the scars would follow him until he could contract a proper healer, he picked the cat up and tossed it over his shoulder, nearly doubling over under the new weight as he began marching on down the forest path. At least the animals should back off with my trophy so openly displayed. The Kinlord thought blithely, well, at least the ones afraid of the obvious predator. The sun had long since begun to set as Narcissus finally managed to navigate himself beyond the constant wall of trees. The sound of waves bashing themselves against the steep cliffs he had oh so wondrously gazed upon mere days prior, swiftly overtaking the constant noise of the forest. Sighing tiredly, he forced his legs to move on, and moments later found himself looking at the most beautiful sunset he had ever seen. The setting sun in the distance piercing the mists of Pyandanea in a dance of prismatic lights that looked to have been arranged by the hand of a master artist. even if it was swiftly ruined by the sight he caught just below where he was standing, an utterly ruined Alinori ship, the Seahawk, now completely covered in the highly invasive kelp that had spelled its demise long before they even had the time to notice it. Narcissus forced down thoughts of his old friend Captain Arlatar and his fellow diplomats, and finally turned away, beginning the long process of creating a proper campsite with liberal use of flames, even as his upbringing revolted at the very idea of doing manual labor. His expression turned rather brittle as he placed his prey on the ground and realized he would need to skin it and then prepare it before it had the time to spoil. Think of it as a hunting trip, he muttered to himself even as his hand shook, a proper noble adventure and not the scrambling of a starving peasant. Yes, he nodded half deliriously, that is correct, a proper noble act. The bound weapon spell flashed within his hand, and he got to work. Miraculously, he did not throw up once, even if the constant breaks he took only served to prolong his suffering. Hours later, when the sun was well and truly gone, the Kinlord's expression was one of utter despair as he forced himself to chew on the mostly burnt, incredibly stringy muscles of a serpent cat, wondering just what he had done to deserve this kind of fate. Finafin, the soon-to-be overlord of the Dominion, if nothing was done about it, was rather clear that he would protect him so long as he had his support. But Neris's recruitment into the Thalmor would only be stopped if he managed to establish beneficial contact with Pyandonea that would be of use in the upcoming war. But how does one form an alliance with a people not seen for generations, one known for their animosity for the Altmer, and one with a supposedly immortal Aldmer sovereign who would not easily forget his past animosity at that? Narcissus doubted his ally cared much for his methods, even if he supposedly wished for his success, ordering him to take one damned ship and sail for a continent no one knew the exact location of, with what could barely pass for a proper noble's entourage, much less that of a kinlord. Not that said kinlord could possibly defy the High Justiciar and bring more forces with him anyway. That would be impolite for someone of his station after all. Narcissus scoffed in a vaguely amused manner and shook his head, his amusement swiftly overtaken by bitterness. Not much use to me now, are they? Neris had obviously tried coming with him, but he made sure the headmaster of the tower he himself had financed for centuries did not make the same mistake again, and kept the girl properly distracted until he left. Best she learn how to better defend herself, even if she was already leagues above her peers, long before she faced off against Lord Dagoth in her idiotic attempt to suck up to the Thalmor. The sheer gall of those peasants, Narcissus scowled, thinking themselves worthy of being the heirs of Aldmeris. A small part of him allowed himself the fantasy of imagining what it would be like to use the connections he would form with the Sea Elves to overthrow the traitors, but he quickly shook it off. Now was not the time for childish daydreaming, even if he could use some actual dreams right about now. Leant as he was against a trunk, he had spent far too much magicka drying. Narcissus didn't even notice as he dozed off, the stinking fur of the creature he had, badly, skinned, helping him keep warm as he slept for the first time in days. The sound of a dry branch being stepped on had the Kinlord's eyes snapping open. The elf? Trying and failing to sneak up on him, flinching away in surprise as the Altmer jumped up on his feet with surprising agility, his bound sword already moving to parry the young elf's panicked spear thrust. What manner of cowardly worm tries stabbing his fellow Mer while they sleep? Narcissus hissed and waved his sword threateningly. Who are you, cur? The younger elf's eyes narrowed as he yelled something in a language Narcissus could make no heads or tails of, and he lunged with his spear once again, nearly stabbing the kinlord as he riposted on sheer instinct, shoving the spear away from himself and following up with a pommel strike. The child's nose broke with a wet crunch, and like an inexperienced fool, he dropped his weapon to grab at the wound, giving Narcissus the perfect opportunity to punish the peasant for his insolence. Only something in the back of his enraged mind told him that would be a terrible idea right now, so all he did was use the flat of his sword as a club and smacked the blue-skinned elf in the side of his head, knocking him out. Once more, the kinlord found himself troubled by the humid air as he felt his excitement leave him, the still rising and falling chest of his opponent telling him he had not slain him on accident. So that is a Maomer, Narcissus muttered as his eyes moved from the child to the trees. As distinct as the rest of my kin, I suppose. Even if they could use better clothes than those rags, his inner noble scoffed. Just as he was about to see to properly tying his new prisoner up, Narcissus heard a hiss to his side, rounding on a serpent that had snuck up on him. Cursing internally, he immediately moved to slice its head off before he could be poisoned. A sudden thump on the back of his head interrupted that, and then all was darkness. His consciousness returned with a sluggishness, the noise around him becoming audible in layers as he groaned and tried returning to sleep. The events of the past few moments flashed within his mind, and his eyes snapped open once more, rapidly scanning his surroundings, only to find himself stuck behind a series of wooden bars within some kind of stone building. A rather small one, if the noise around him was any indicator. Narcissus narrowed his eyes as he noticed that no restraints were placed on him, and then smirked as he realized he had used not destruction magic during his fight. The temptation to simply incinerate his way out immediately rearing itself within his mind, but he quickly decided against it. This unfortunate situation he had found himself in was in fact an opportunity in disguise, even if he could have done with accommodations more befitting of his station. His musings were swiftly interrupted as the door to his prison was shoved open, a trio of figures wearing acceptably elaborate blue and bronze steel scale mail marching inside. The leader of the group was rather obvious to Narcissus's practiced eyes, as a tall and bulky marmor, clad in much heavier garb, masked helm held in the crook of his arm, approached him. He spoke in the same language Narcissus could not understand, before growling and repeating, "You who are?" Ah, finally a civilized tongue to be found. The Kinlord could not help himself as he smiled at his captor. "I am Kinlord Narcissus of Shimmerine, a lord of Alenor and its foremost diplomat." The warrior narrowed his eyes, then glared at one of his subordinates as she chuckled, realizing her leader could not understand a word Narcissus had said. The woman straightened her shoulders and shut up immediately, but the Altmer in the room could still see her amusement. Hissing in annoyance, the lead guard turned back to Narcissus and repeated, "Small words, who are you?" "Ah, to be tempted and then cursed so." Narcissus lamented internally and considered for but a moment before answering, "Messenger." "Messenger?" the guard repeated, frowning. "Message for who?" "Your lord," Narcissus said immediately, not wanting to seem too arrogant to the guard by outright saying he sought King Orgnum. The guard captain once more frowned and looked Narcissus over, no doubt noticing his damaged but obviously high-quality robes made of the finest of blue silks and bearing his emblem of a light purple starburst contained within a sunburst. As the Mer turned to his subordinates and began rattling off commands, the high elf focused on the way they spoke, quickly realizing that while the language was most definitely not Tamrielic, it still held roots in Elnifex, and was thus related to it no matter how distantly, which fit in rather well with the supposed history of these lands. He reminded himself, pushing his mind to translate any word he could catch, and mostly failing, save for managing to catch the word warrior. Now what could that possibly be implying, he mused. Soon enough the guards left without a word, and what he would guess was an hour later returned, only to grab him without ceremony and drag him out and through some kind of market square. Merely touching a kinlord without permission was grounds for punishment, much less manhandling one so, but something told the high elf that complaining was not the wise thing to do at the moment, and so he, instead of throwing a tantrum, he focused on his surroundings. The market around him looked to be middlingly prosperous. The many wooden stands, all surrounding a much larger round stone structure with a seashell-like roof that looked to house the more prosperous merchants within. Speaking of buildings, every single house around him was made of stone, and so were the roads, a fact he could appreciate if not for the utterly alien focus on shell and scale themes that seemed to be oh so abundant in these lands. And the clothing. Why, Narcissus had not seen something quite so scandalous since he was invited to visit that one Redguard crown who wanted to show off his harem. And the man was a known deviant. Every single Mormor around him, and they could be naught else with their blue skins, wore clothing that did not cover nearly as much as it should have, some of them foregoing the covering of their shoulders, knees and stomachs, utterly as they clad themselves in admittedly impressively colorful clothing, that was more fit for a bathhouse than a proper city. How ghastly! The Ultima noble shivered. His inner high elf wanted to mock their barbaric aesthetics, but he was taught his lesson more than once as he observed the mistakes of his kin. Judging a people based on how they seemed, instead of how they were, was a road to folly and humiliation. And Kinlord Narcissus of Shimmerine had had more than enough humiliation heaved upon him to last a lifetime. The guards dragged him out of the market and into a walled-off section of the city, its buildings growing both larger and more elaborate, while its inhabitants actually seemed to be clad in something that could pass as appropriate. If one squinted, Narcissus realized the noble's quarter. 'Twas the sole reasonable conclusion after all. Fun as it was to have his superiority reaffirmed to him, Narcissus did notice that many of said nobles seemed almost frantic with preparation, and many looked to be armed and armored, some of them even going as far as to be openly armed and armored, even if they were not soldiers. They were preparing for a conflict of some sort, a conflict he could doubtlessly use to get closer to his goal. Any further thoughts were interrupted as he was led into a middling palace covered in snake iconography, the constant noise that had surrounded him even in the noble's quarter dying out instantly as he was brought into a large chamber. A throne room. He quickly corrected himself as he took in the figure atop the spiked throne. Hushed whispers erupted all around him as the nobles within realized what he was. But the enthroned elf raising his hand was enough to shut them up for now. "I am told by my serpent guard you claim to be a diplomat of Alinor." The elf atop the throne, one that looked worryingly similar to the child Narcissus had defeated, and was clad in actual proper robes befitting high station, spoke with authority and skill. "What would the Ultima," he spoke the name as if it were an insult, "want with our lands?" Narcissus bowed, hiding his excitement at hearing proper Tamrielic. "Allow me to introduce myself first. I am Kinlord Narcissus of Shimmerine, acting as diplomat for my beloved Alinor." A kinlord. The elf frowned before his eyes opened wide in realization. "You were shipwrecked, were you not?" "Indeed," Narcissus hid his scowl well. "Our ship was unprepared for the kelp infestation." "And you are the sole survivor?" the Myoma asked. "Indeed," the Ultima answered simply. "You have my condolences." The sea elf ever so slightly inclined his head, obviously not believing him fully, but willing to let things play out. "I am Sea Lord Norevalion, the master of Tiguna Plateau and its surrounding islands." Frowning as he seemed to notice Narcissus's lack of reaction, he leaned forward in his throne. Now, what message was so important that it would need a kinlord to deliver it? "I carry a missive of introduction," Narcissus answered without fear. "One meant for King Orgnum of Pyandanea." "I am afraid you have come for naught if that is the case." The Myoma Sea Lord gave him a confused look. "King Orgnum is dead, has been for 2 centuries now." Narcissus felt the world spin around him and his throat become dry as the situation rapidly became clear. His etiquette, already drained by the events that had brought him here, finally broke fuck. 506, Interlude I, Part 2, A Narcissistic Negotiation. The throne room of Tiguna's palace was taken by a heavy silence after the Ultima's outburst. The Myoma Sea Lord patiently waiting for the self-proclaimed kinlord, who had caught his attention to show more of himself, while Narcissus battled with the realization of just how utterly fucked he was. He was no mewling child, however, and he managed to calm himself swiftly enough, especially after embarrassing himself so openly. "I see." He spoke, "And who rules Pyandanea now, Sea Lord?" The Myoma allowed himself a light smirk. "I would declare that I do. However, so would the Sea Lord of every single other city of our fair lands." It did not take the Ultima much to realize his fellow noble was talking about a civil war, or at least a civil strife of some level. "Would that be the reason your subjects outside are so very excited?" "Noticed that, did you?" The sea elf quirks an eyebrow. "You might just actually be who you say you are." Narcissus ignored the jab with a practiced placidity. The Sea Lord made a vaguely acknowledging noise. "As of right now, we are preparing for a raid from my fellow Sea Lord Perondo of Mantu, the plateau island to our east. The young Mer is an ambitious and cruel one, known to brutalize the land he conquers. He scoffs, a rather daunting prospect, and one sufficient to make my people move without direct prodding. Troubles with the levy, my lord. Narcissus pushed the boundary slightly. Ha! And to his satisfaction, Noravalian barked out a laugh. Our little civil war has become little more than ritual at this point. Everyone seems content to merely raid each other instead of attempting to actually unite our lands, lest they draw the attention of all the other sea lords. Narcissus held back a wince, a troubling state of affairs. And one you have managed to preserve, Kinlord. The Merma gave him a nod. Pardon. This morning, when my serpent guard caught you, you had handily defeated a young Morma. Noravalion elaborated, that same youth is my younger brother Larnil, the very same brother who tried fleeing from his engagement to the daughter of Sea Lord Umananil of Kato Idur when he found out about it yesterday. So that is why he even bothered talking to me. Narcissus's eyes widened slightly before he offered the slightest bow. Happy to be of assistance, Sea Lord. Yes, I am certain you are. The Meoma gave him a bored look. But I still find myself curious. Why would a supposed kinlord bother seeking Pyandanea? Is your attempt at a third Aldmeri dominion failing so miserably that you would seek out your enemies of yesteryear? Doubly so since you expected to negotiate with Orgnum of all elves. Narcissus hesitated, feeling like his next words would be the difference between success and failure. The Sea Lord had shown himself to be somewhat flippant, only barely interested in Narcissus's presence, but the Kinlord could see beyond the facade, as the sharp eyes of the blue elf never left him, disassembling his every word and gesture with a cold efficiency. We are indeed facing troubles at the moment. Narcissus chose to be open. He had very little to lose, and much to gain by being honest. The empire of Tamriel is growing stronger by the day, and the Thalmor of Alinor are pushing for a reopening of hostilities as swiftly as possible. I am here to secure any kind of support I am able. Noravalian leaned back into his throne, and why would the Mer of Pyandanea care for what happens on the shores of Tamriel, especially now that our king has died without declaring an heir? Because the empire is growing too strong. Narcissus pressed, should they defeat the Dominion, they will not stop there. In fact, I doubt they will ever stop. The sea elf narrowed his eyes. And why would they seek us out? The humans have barely interacted with us in centuries, and what little success they may find against us will be washed away by the centuries as it had always been. Not with a septim dragonborn at their helm. Narcissus spoke gravely. Even the other Maoma within the chamber, incapable of speaking Tamrielic as they were, recognized the name the Ultima mentioned, and a heavy silence once more took the throne room. Noravalian's entire posture shifted, the play he was enacting disappearing in an instant. You are certain? I am, Narcissus nodded, but things get even worse. The Morma Sea Lord's expression may as well have screamed, how does it get worse? Suppressing his sudden bout of schadenfreude, Narcissus went on, just before I left the ports of Shimmerine, it was announced that Titus Mede's adopted daughter, one Minthara Septim, would be marrying the newly risen Hortator of Morrowind, the same elf who had mere months prior removed the curse from their lands. Seeing the sea elf's expression growing increasingly grave, Narcissus pressed, the greatest magi of Alinor, after having analyzed the deeds and abilities we knew the two to be capable of, assured me that the both of them are easily capable of attaining immortality. And so you came here, seeking an immortal ruler to counter them. Noravalian posited. One elder mage would not have made such a grand difference. No offense to your late king's skills, of course. Narcissus inclined his head. My point was that should the Dominion fail to contain them, it is only a matter of time before they get bored with what they have, as many Septims had before our times, and seek new lands to conquer. And Pyandanea is far closer to them than Akavir. The Sea Lord nodded. I can see the logic behind your words, even if I feel myself being directed to the obvious conclusion. It would not be obvious otherwise. Narcissus allowed himself just a touch of cheek. Noravalian directed him with a pointed look, but the Ultima could see the slightest hint of amusement in his eyes. Allow me to be candid with you, Sea Lord. Narcissus grasped the momentum he had built. "I can see that you value your people's safety and prosperity, and that you disdain the current situation of your fair kingdom. And so can a blind child." Norivalian did not appear to like being read so blatantly. "What is your point?" "My point, Sea Lord," Narcissus went on, "is that we could help each other, the Dominion and Pyandanea both. You seek to unite your lands and stop this wasteful civil war, while the Dominion seeks allies and now avenues of trade. An alliance between us is the logical next step. And turn myself into laughing stock by allying with Altmer?" Norivalian frowned. "The other Sea Lords would unite against me faster than I could so much as think of making any kind of use of such an alliance." "That is problematic," Narcissus allowed internally, "but then simply do not announce it until it is too late. If things were that simple, conflict would not exist." The Sea Lord looked at him like he was an idiot. "Not my meaning." The Altmer shook his head, forcing himself to ignore the snide comment. "I am not so foolish as to propose we bring an entire army to aid you. But what if I were to use one of your ships to summon a number of powerful magi who could hide themselves under illusions? The sudden advantage you would have over your peers would turn the tide of any battle, and too quickly for the others to react. Our magi are mostly healers and helmsmen." The Sea Lord considered briefly, "But that would still be insufficient. I simply do not have the resources to fight all the other cities, even if I were to take them on one by one. To think I would be unfortunate enough to get stranded with one of the weaklings," Narcissus lamented internally, even as his expression remained perfectly polite. "Is conquest truly the sole way of uniting your lands? Did King Orgnum leave nothing behind that would give you an advantage?" The Maorma nearly waved the question off, but paused, giving Narcissus an evaluating look before answering. "There very well could be one chance we could grasp." Preempting the inevitable question, Norivalian rose his hand to forestall him. "You have convinced me of your station, or at least that you are no simple sailor playing at nobility, and I will not have an honored guest remain standing for so long. Take the time to rest, and we will reconvene within the gardens before sundown." Before he could get another word in, Narcissus was shown out by a sufficiently subservient palace servant and led to rooms befitting his station, where he was given a meal and a change of clothes. Thankfully, not the scandalous garb he had seen outside. Insulting his host over such cultural norms did not seem like an overly wise idea, but it was a hill he was more than willing to die on. As he looked up from the flowing robe, Narcissus's eyes landed upon a magnificently clear mirror, nearly flinching as he saw his beaten-up and tired reflection upon it. "No wonder they did not immediately believe me." He scowled. He pointedly did not listen to the part of his mind that practically whimpered at the sight. And then, as one does, he began healing every tiny little bruise he could see, spending far too much time washing out the slightest tangle of his hair so he could retain the barest semblance of his true look. By the time he was done, he looked at least halfway decent, for a lower lord at least. And yet, as he looked upon his reflection once again, he felt a bone-deep weariness nearly overtake him. The constant fakery, the snide jabs of his host, him pretending not to be terrified out of his mind. It all felt oh so exhausting to the Kinlord. Except, he narrowed his eyes at his sagging arms, "I have no option but to succeed." He glared at his posture, the despair in his expression, and the lack of will in his eyes, and felt terribly furious at himself. "Look at you," he scoffed internally, "so terrified of failure you nearly started begging like a pathetic little peasant." "It does not matter," he ordered himself. "We must do this, for Nerys, and for Alinor." He ate through his meal, some form of crab soup, in peace, thoughts drifting between doubts and duty all the while. An hour later he stood before the mirror, practicing his perfect posture and removing any sign of weakness he could find. By the time the same servant who led him there came back to retrieve him, he looked ready to face the world in its entirety, even if he still felt like he was about to drown. He was led through the palace's western wing and out into a large garden filled to the brim with delightfully organized, colorful flowers and trees, the leaves of which danced through the air in an almost magical display. Sadly, as much as he would have preferred wasting his hours away in admiration, he soon reached his destination and was greeted by the sight of the Sea Lord and what he could only guess was the Pyandanean equivalent of a great mage of some persuasion. Kinlord. Noravalian nodded. This is the Lady Elorian, a mage of some renown and a historian of a much greater acclaim. He waved his hand. My lady, this is Kinlord Narcissus of Shimmerine, envoy of Alinor. An honor, Kinlord. The woman spoke in clipped Tamrielic. Charmed, my lady. Narcissus inclined his head and turned to face Noravalian. Before we begin, I am afraid the previous excitement made me forget something. Moving his hand slowly as to appear non-threatening, Narcissus cast the inventory spell and his letter of introduction appeared within his grasp. He did his utmost to ignore the dozen or so marksmen currently aiming at him. The letter intended for Orgnum, no doubt. The Sea Lord waved his guards down. Indeed. Narcissus nodded and took his seat as the Sea Lord offered it, proffering the letter in turn. I apologize for not showing it earlier, but I was understandably frazzled by my experiences. Being shipwrecked is rarely a pleasant experience. Noravalian nodded, unfurling the letter as he did. But they can also be a sign of fate in my culture. Maybe the waves chose to dislodge you upon my shores because you would not have met success anywhere else. And definitely not because it is the northwesternmost island of the archipelago. Narcissus did his best not to roll his eyes. But of course, Sea Lord, your hospitality has been as grand as one may hope for, given the circumstances. Quite. The Marmor, rather slowly, finished his reading and returned the letter. Now you asked me earlier if there was a way to declare a true heir of Orgnum to all of Pyandanea, and the good lady here confirmed my thoughts while you rested. Taking that as her cue, Elorian nodded. Deep within the ruins of Orgnum's palace, his body still lay untouched, and upon his finger is said to be a ring of pure gold. Gold taken directly out of his lost coffer, the last he had ever had it create. Orgnum's coffer, Narcissus noted, the source of infinite coin lost to a Septim fleet an era ago. The ring, the Sea Lord cuts in, is said to only be wearable by one of Orgnum's own blood, and luckily for us, every single Sea Lord is descended from the king, no matter how distantly. Such is the hope at least. The lady gave him a dry look before continuing. During what you know as the Oblivion Crisis, the Daedra Clavicus invaded Orgnum's sanctum and drowned the glorious king in his legions. No one is truly certain why the Daedra did so, but even now the ruins remain inaccessible to all, overtaken by maddened servants and guardians, and remora that seem to be without number. Narcissus immediately caught on. You wish for me and mine to retrieve this ring for you, don't you? Quite so. The Sea Lord nodded. I will not risk my own in breaching the ruined capital, and what better way to prove yourself to all Pyandanea than to retrieve the way for its unification? Indeed. Narcissus did his best to keep the dryness from his voice. However, Noravalian pointed his index finger upwards. Before any of that can happen, I will need you to prove yourself to my counselors and warriors. Many of them question why I let an Altmer into my halls, and I will not risk my reign for your vague promise of alliance. And there it is, Narcissus grumbled to himself. You will join me in battling Perondo, Noravalian declared with no room for argument. I will see if you are willing to back your words with your blade, and so will my subjects. The High Elf nodded numbly. Just make sure to have a ship ready for me once we are done. I may be proud of my skills, but taking down an obvious Oblivion gate by myself is not something I'm capable of. He will admit he took an inordinate amount of pleasure in their startled expressions. 507, Interlude I, Part 3, A Narcissistic Gambit. The sounds of battle rang through the helmet he had been given, the imperfectly fitted scale mail weighing his shoulders down and making him sweat like some kind of menial as he stood beside the Sea Lord and his serpent guards. A pained scream made him fidget and drew his eyes to the sight of a Morma warrior being devoured by a large blue-scaled serpent, the beast leaping out of the sea as the elf tried boarding one of the attacking ships. The Sea Lord muttered something in his own language, his eyes following the same scene. Pardon me. Narcissus cleared his throat. But why exactly are your men throwing themselves at the ships? He was no tactician, not beyond the basics of command at least, but this seemed excessive. Elven lives should never be wasted like this. Because those ships are valuable. Norevalian answered blithely, "My own fleet is too small to both defend my lands and raid the others, and this is a chance we must take." "I see." The Altmer nodded. "I do wonder, however, when does the value of the ships fall under the value of experienced soldiers?" Something told him he had nearly gotten his teeth broken for that comment, but he kept his gaze focused on the Marmere. "You have an idea?" The blue elf grunted. "Speak." "How far is your own fleet?" he asked first. "Verzis tells me it will take an hour yet." Seeing the Altmer's confusion, Norevalian elaborated, "My own serpent, there is a bond between us. Now, your idea?" "Pretend a retreat," Narcissus said simply. "Draw them in and then surround them. You have the numbers, and they will not be able to use the serpent so far from the shore. And then cut them off with my own ships." The Sea Lord smirked under his helm. "Yes, I can see the merit in this." He nodded and immediately began barking orders in Pyandanian. Horns began ringing out, and soon the battle withdrew from the shoreline, the attacking Mantu raiders surging after the retreating soldiers of Tiguna, none of them noticing they were slowly led into overextending. "Time to show your mettle, Kinlord." The Sea Lord's voice drew him from his observations. "Do try not to die. It would make me look bad." Before Narcissus could answer, Norevalian drew his saber and roared some kind of battle cry, the Serpent Guard regiment surging after him and nearly leaving the Altmer in the dust, as they moved far more swiftly than he would expect under so much metal. He jogged after them, mindful to preserve his stamina for the actual fight, and still cursing the smug armorer for the poor fit of his shoulder pads. The bastard had it out for him, he was certain. By the time he had reached the front lines, the ambush had already started, and the warriors of Tiguna were falling upon the Mantuans like an avalanche, the Serpent Guard and their Sea Lord battling the leadership of the raiding party and cutting through them. A bit too quickly, Narcissus noted, as he saw a few of them getting surrounded. But he did not act immediately, letting Norevalian get himself even deeper into trouble before ultimately rising his free hand and casting his most powerful spell. The battlefield flashed with light as a burst of chain lightning struck the Mantuans, instantly killing 4 of them and heavily wounding 5 more, giving the Sea Lord more than ample opportunity to cut down any who still stood against him. Narcissus must have killed someone important, because just like that, the tides had turned, and the invading Marmor fell into disorder, running for their ships like cowards, even as dozens fell to their pursuers' arrows and blades, and a few yet to Narcissus's thunderbolts. Many still reached their ships, anchors already raised and marines ready with bows in hand. And yet the Tigunan warriors did not stop, as just as the enemy serpent was about to lunge at them once again, a loud horn burst through the eternal mist surrounding Pyandonea, and the fleet of Tiguna became visible. Things turned into a blur for Narcissus then, as he rushed to cut down as many of his new allies' foes as possible, even if he soon found himself mesmerized by the sight of 2 sea serpents snapping at each other, the one belonging to Norevalian, swiftly winning out, as its opponent was riddled with spell and arrow, and forced to flee, leaving the fleet under its protection to the depredations of the Tigunan elves. He did not realize his ears were ringing until someone clapped his shoulder with enough force to nearly make him stumble, the noise rapidly disappearing as he refocused and realized the Sea Lord had approached him. "Excellent work, Kinlord. I see the tales of your people were not exaggerations." "One can only hope," Narcissus muttered, still a bit out of it. "Bah." Norevalian clapped his shoulder again, the blow only serving to aggravate the scale mail-induced discomfort further. "Cheer up. You have spilled blood with us, and none will gainsay my alliance with you now, not after that showing." Stricken by a wave of relief, all Narcissus could do was offer the Maorma a slight smile and simply repeat, "One can only hope." Not even the sway of the Marmor ship under him could stop Narcissus from grinning like a child in a confectionery store as the shores of Shimmerine came into his sight, even if part of him would have preferred he did not return, as changed as he did. The previous month had been one filled to the brim with battle and politicking, the high of victory leading the elves of Tiguna into launching a counter-raid against Mantu, one which swiftly evolved into a full-blown invasion and occupation as Noravelion won battle after battle and then personally slew Sea Lord Perondo and his serpent in a duel. Needless to say, Narcissus' new ally had proven himself more competent than originally expected, and the High Elf even started something of a friendship with his distant sea-born cousin, the latter being far more respectful of his station after he had proven himself in battle thrice over. Narcissus was never quite as grateful to his good fortune than at the moment he realized the Maorma simply didn't use destruction magic on any kind of grander scale, which let him present himself as more valuable than he truly was. His string of good luck did not end there, and he got to attend the wedding between Noravelion's younger brother and the daughter of Sea Lord Umernanil, even if he had to stomach acting as the novelty amusement of the night for the other nobles present. But yes, humiliations aside, he could firmly say that the northernmost trio of Pyandonia's islands were now under Noravelion's, and thus his however distant influence. A true miracle as far as he was concerned, when one took into account the Maorma's civil strife. His return caused quite the stir amongst his people, the tragedy of his shipwrecking, and his weathered look nearly making his subjects suspect he was being held hostage. But the fact he was let go by the Maorma, who were then granted leave to explore the city by himself, quickly made them understand the truth of the situation. He did still make sure to assign some tails to all of them, best not risk things at this juncture. Upon returning to his palace and his favored study, Narcissus nearly cried his heart out in relief, but contented himself to eating something that wasn't seafood for once, and wearing clothes that did not make him look a mere lord. Finally, after weeks of suffering, he could take a moment to relax. A moment that was ripped away from him as the High Justiciar once more marched into his palatial home like he owned the place, his expression set into a menacing frown as he stared the kinlord down. Narcissus. No greetings, no titles, just a master naming his dog, "I see you have secured the alliance I demanded." The kinlord, hardened by war and tragedy, merely tapped his table, not quite. The air turned heavy, and Finarfin commanded explain. And so he did extensively, not once causing any kind of visible upset to the Thalmor, much to his inner disappointment. "I see," Finarfin noted blandly. "Having full access to Orgnum's fleets would have been more beneficial, but this will do as well. Orgnum would have likely had me thrown out of his audience hall if I was lucky." Narcissus scowled. His hatred of us was known to even the dirty's Marma peasant. "And yet you still managed to convince a sea lord to side with us, however tangentially." Finarfin points out simply, warning him of the Septim girl would have worked in our favor, no matter how much the Aldmer hated us. Narcissus wanted to roll his eyes, but was still mindful of the monster in his presence. These hypotheticals will not help us. What of the Oblivion Gate? "Are you certain it is one?" Finarfin asked. "Almost completely." Narcissus shrugged. The description of the event and aftermath fits, and the fact it has been 200 years without anyone occupying, or at least looting the most prominent location in Pyandonia is telling enough. He had grown up on stories of those cursed portals, and saw the aftermath of a few with his own eyes. "Indeed," Finarfin hummed ominously, "and the seas, our ships can truly not access them. If the Seahawk sunk without recourse, our lesser ships would be ruined in moments." Narcissus scoffed. "The only vessel capable of reaching Pyandonia with any kind of certainty is the one currently moored in my docks, and I doubt we would be able to replicate the rituals they use to protect themselves with any kind of speed, not to mention ending our overtures before they could even begin in truth." "For once, I concur." Finarfin nodded and produced a scroll. "I am authorizing you to bring an elder mage and 3 archmagi with you. Take whatever other forces you can, fit on the ship, and get our friend his ring. The Thalmor Council will be making their vote soon, and my bid for overlordship needs to be absolute if we are to win the upcoming war." "Just make sure to keep your end of the bargain," Narcissus muttered as the High Justiciar left without bothering to wait for his response. "Just you wait, you bastard. One day I will shove that damned mace where the sun does not reach, and I will enjoy every single second of it." The mists of Pyandonia split as the shoreline came into view, the darkness of the night broken only by the lights of the Maorma city of Wega, which served as the closest settlement to Orgnum's palace. Narcissus unfolded a scroll from one of his belt bags and began noting down the landmarks he could see, swiftly finding the direction they would need to follow. The palace is 1 to 2 days' march east of here, if we are not beset by beasts, of course. Doubting us already, Kinlord? A timeless voice came from his left. Nothing of the sort, my lady. He bowed to the far too young-looking mage, merely preparing myself for what is to come. What a grand way of saying absolutely nothing. The era's old elder mage indicated no emotion. Do make sure to send your little Thalmor puppets to secure information and supplies from the city, if you are going to whine at least. Narcissus turned to speak to the justiciar, but the elf was already barking out orders, and the Thalmor infiltrators aboard their ship were already halfway through disembarking. The Kinlord felt his bafflement rising and went to ask the mage what was going on, but she preempted him. I have lived through one dominion already. These children will not bother me for long, even if they win their little conflict. Then why support them? Narcissus couldn't help but ask. Because Talos was a bastard who threw the Numidium at us just because we refused to negotiate. She answered immediately, voice and expression still perfectly blank. And seeing his descendants suffering is a pleasant way to spend my days. Ah, Narcissus said helpfully. Yes, the elder drawled. Ah. Narcissus almost missed the constant pressure of the Maorma scale mail as his entourage cut their way into the jungle, the few sea elves who had been volunteered by Noravellian to his aid guiding them as best as they could. But a band of 100 Altmer was not something one could easily conceal, especially since the quartet of Magi refused to so much as help with the campfires, and even less with the healing of the wounds sustained by the soldiers defending them. Narcissus was slowly starting to realize why the other races tended to hate his people, even if he would keep those thoughts to himself until he died. The blade self at the head of their troop cut through a large leaved bush, immediately rising his guard as they had been ambushed thrice in similar situations already, but instead of hungering predators, the sight that greeted them was a ruined cobbled road leading up to tall city walls. It would seem you were correct, Elder Kalia said, her eyes scanning the city and no doubt seeing what none of them could. There is an active portal waiting inside. Narcissus nodded, absently checking on the straps of his moonsteel armor, but before he could take a stop forward, the mage's raised hand stopped him. We will take the lead now, she said, voice still refusing to carry any emotion. Come now, students, we have work to do. The 3 archmages followed after her without a word, and the band began approaching Orgnum's palace, or, as it happened, the ruins of it. They did not even reach the walls before an arrow pierced the air, immediately drawing their eyes to a Marma clad in rusty scale standing atop the battlements with a flimsy bow in hand. The sea elf no doubt went to say something, but Lady Kalia did not seem amused by his attempt, and lazily waved her hand, causing the elf and the wall under him to burst into tiny chunks. He might have been useful. Narcissus nearly cursed his own audacity the instant he spoke. No. The elder spoke with the certainty of a mountain. He was under a Daedric contract, knowingly or not. Wisely, the Kinlord merely nodded in acceptance. This painted the pattern for the rest of their excursion, as the elder mage simply crushed anyone or anything that considered it wise to get in their way. Even the few innocent civilians eking out an existence were given no warning, as the mages simply removed them with a rapid application of thunder. Narcissus morbidly thanked the divines within the privacy of his own mind that the presumed innocents were relatively few amongst the maddened occupants of the city. Even if his mind was mostly occupied by the encounters and ensuing displays of the Magi, most of the march to the palace proper was relatively peaceful, with the soldiery checking every corner as the mage quartet refused to so much as slow down. The palace itself was surrounded by a large moat, wide enough for 3 warships to pass each other by without collision, and as they stepped upon the somehow pristine wooden bridge across it, 4 sapphire-colored serpents burst out of the water, spitting thunder from their maws. Only 3 Altmer fell to the assault before Lady Kalia grasped the air, lifting them all and opening them up to her students, who proceeded to incinerate them with gouts of flame, so hot part of the moat evaporated. No healing was offered by the mages, as many of the soldiers did their best to hide their pain, and without a word they descended deeper into the palace, cutting through the wards with the practiced weight of centuries. Within awaited all manner of Daedric abominations, beasts of flesh and metal transformed through horrifying deals with Clavicus Vile, who all met the same fate as the sea serpents outside. Even if Narcissus was forced to watch even more of his personal guard get wounded and even killed by the mage's carelessness. A pompous Dremora mage challenged their approach as they neared the throne room, and offered them a deal so that they could pass forward unmolested, an innocent-sounding trade that would have had all of them giving up their still-beating hearts to the monster. The good elder turned the creature inside out for its trouble. He did not know Dremora could scream like that. And finally, after 3 days of trudging through jungle and ruin, they came upon the throne room. The once opulent place of power was covered in rubble and the remains of the fallen, the stink of ancient air mixed with blood assaulting the high elven noses as they took in the sight of the throne itself. No grand chair stood there but the familiar rune-shaped portal leading unto a hellscape, and one would need not be a great genius to realize where their prize was held. Narcissus prepared himself to be ordered to simply march inside and throw both himself and his people into hell itself. But Elder Kalia surprised him as she spoke. "Secure the chamber, my apprentices and I will deal with this." Shakily, the Kinlord nodded, and did not even reprimand the few of his bodyguards who sighed in relief as the quartet of mages entered the portal to the Fields of Regret. As the first explosions began roaring out from within the portal, Narcissus wisely instructed his followers to set up camp around the shimmering passage, doing his best to distract both himself and his fellow elves from the increasing frequency of demonic screams coming from within. He was finally beginning to understand why his people venerated their elder magi, but still made sure they were left well enough alone. They were all fucking terrifying. Hours later, Narcissus was feeling like his soul had been drained from his body and almost failed to notice the elder walking out of the portal and tossing him a gleaming band of gold, one he barely managed to catch as he scrambled for it. The Sea Lord was correct. The elder spoke simply, "It is bloodline bound." The Kinlord looked down at the ring and then back at the completely impeccable woman who just walked out of oblivion alongside her apprentices and did his utmost not to gape like a child. "Of course, my lady. Do make sure to show it to him privately and have him test it before you present it more officially." Kalia added, "We can modify the enchantment to fit him, and embarrassing our ally so publicly would mean this was a waste of my time." She leaned in slightly, "And I assure you, wasting my time is a crime you would not be forgiven." "Understood, my lady." Narcissus grabbed onto his etiquette lessons like a lifeline. "We will ensure the Sea Lord ascends as the leader of his people with all due haste." She hummed, tilted her head in a manner that may have been construed as a nod if one squinted, and told the troops to pack up. Months later, having ensured that Noravelion was crowned the new king of Piandanea, Narcissus returned back to Shimmerine once again. The personal promise of friendship from the Myoma sovereign an insufficient balm to his tired soul. They did not need to modify the ring to prove the Sea Lord's lineage, but everything else that could have gone wrong did go wrong, as Narcissus was forced to constantly ship reinforcements to Tiguna as the other Sea Lords tried usurping the ring in a maddened dash. Thousands died before Noravelion proved his dominance and left no room for doubters, leading a combined invasion force to Orgnum's palace and retaking it as his new capital, the act possible now that the portal to oblivion was closed shut. Narcissus wanted to feel elated at his success, but after being shown just how utterly insignificant he was by the elder mage, and having his mediocrity shoved into his face with every single battle he participated in, all he felt was a bone-deep exhaustion. Days later, just as he was about to leave for the palace the Thalmor had usurped from the Aranas for his trial, he received a missive from the academy Neris was studying at, and he felt his blood freeze as his mind immediately reached for the worst possible conclusion. Luckily for his heart, the missive was a positive one, and informed him of his daughter's ascension to the rank of Archmage, as she had proven herself a master of no less than 3 schools of magic during a duel against her teacher, where she transformed the entire room into a labyrinth of traps and eked out a narrow victory as she pierced his wards. The Thalmor Council was thus given quite the surprise, as the kin-lord they expected to be a snivelling noble coward marched into their domain with a wide smile on his face, his posture that of a seasoned warrior as he stared them all down without flinching. Finarfin would have probably felt proud then if he did not have to contain a snarl of frustration as he felt his leash on the kin-lord loosening. 508, Chapter 121, Oblivious Observations. General point of view. The eternally shifting tides of oblivion clashed against each other in a brilliant display as the concepts of domination and suffering pressed against a light so brilliant it burned out all it touched, their originators glaring daggers into each other even as each held back their desire to crush the other. Unwilling to spend a second longer in her hated compatriot's presence, the blindingly beautiful woman, clad in a toga of white and gold, was the first to calm her power. The horned demon clutching his clawed hand into a fist across her slowly did the same, his hatred momentarily pacified by his dominance being proven once again, even if he knew it to be a mere play. The two of them are almost cute. Their silent and unseen observer mused, nearly giving herself up with a titter of amusement, so very similar at their core, yet so very hateful of each other. Mora has fallen. Meridia broke the silence. You assured me all they would do was weaken him, and yet he was torn to pieces faster than any before him, and left us looking like fools. Yes, that is what happens when 5 of us go against one. Molag Bal scowled at her, refusing to acknowledge the true actor behind the killing, even as he unconsciously flexed his still stinging hand. Attempt to ridicule me once more, and I will simply leave. The air around Meridia blazed with light as her voice rose. You are the one who demanded we retreat once our probing attacks were crushed. Don't be foolish. Molag gnashed his teeth. Neither of us was ready for a full war, especially not when nearly all of their legions were present. My probing attack was met with Sheogorath's full power. We could not have done a thing even if we knew Mora was about to die. How pathetic. Meridia scowled. You call yourself the Lord of Domination, yet the moment you are faced with opposition, you tuck your tail between your legs. Silence yourself, whore. Molag ignored the now searing pain in his arm as he once more clutched his fist. You know damn well that it would have taken us days to get through their defenses, only you are arrogant enough to think we could take them on, especially with our legions permanently damaged. There are always more worthy heroes to become my Aurorans. Meridia smiled serenely. And you can always take more snivelling worms and ascend them to be something beyond mere playthings. The demon across her exhaled his growing fury. We are wasting our time talking in circles. What is done is done. Meridia frowned. Reminding you of just how pathetic you are is never. I told you to be silent, whore. Molag Bal grew massively in size, a jagged mace the size of a tower forming in his hand. This alliance only exists because we hate the mortal more than we do each other, and I have better things to do than waste my time listening to your mewling little insults. Now tell me what is our next step, or I will do the elf's work for him. Their observer was almost tempted to interfere, but held back, deciding to enjoy the show instead of risking discovery for a plan that would probably not work at best. Meridia's power shimmered just below the surface as she realized Bal was being entirely serious. Her endless pride warring with good sense as she nearly summoned her replacement for Dawnbreaker. The moment the name flashed in her mind, it was as if someone had poured a river of freezing water all over her. Her current rage was instantly subsumed by the veritable sea of hatred she held for the one who had dared to insult her and still live after the fact. She lowered her hand and stiffly nodded. Our cooperation is more important. Bal glared at her before ever so slowly allowing his form to shrink. Speak then. Direct assault has already proven useless, and the others will not sit idly by if we provoke another apocrypha. The cowards are so afraid they'd rather protect the mortal than end him. Meridia's scowl could not have been more pronounced as she spoke. She very nearly said that the fact they would be defended from a similar attack would be useful, but neither of their prides would survive admitting to the fact. Instead, she focused on what she could effect. If we cannot go after him ourselves, and our agents are insufficient for the task, then the next obvious step must be followed. The Thalmor. The way the Lord of Domination said the name, he may as well have been talking about a particularly irritating bug, too small to be worth the effort of scraping off his boot. You want us to empower them to do our work for us. They are a tolerable choice of servants. Meridia allowed herself the slightest glint in her eye. Why, some of them are closer to your own ideals than my own. The ensuing growl had her very slightly raising her arms in placation. But my point remains, the mortals are far more numerous than our legions, and there are some among their number who could very well be a danger in their own right. Which is the only reason I am even considering it, Molag grunted. A beat of silence passed, and Meridia pressed, So? So, her reluctant compatriot growled, we throw our power behind the elven idiots, and hope, the word was spoken as if it would make him violently ill, that they are able to win where Mora could not. That is your grand plan? Yes. Meridia's face was utterly blank as she nodded. We find ourselves lacking in options, lest you forget. Molag looked like he wanted to admit to anything but after a full minute of hateful glaring, he forced himself to nod. Fine. And that was that. Do try not to embarrass us both, whore. Try to keep yourself from your distractions long enough so we can win, worm. Meridia spoke at exactly the same time. The two did not wait for the other's response, as they simply left, no doubt convincing themselves that they were the one who had the last word. Oh my, their observer tittered, finally free of risk. How very, very delectable. Summum. Within the parallel to a very specific room of the white gold tower encompassed by the spiral skyne, a dark-skinned figure, previously enshrouded by a pair of crystalline wings, slowly sat up, blinking herself awake as she realized she was nowhere near where she remembered. Ah, finally awake, my dear. Her attention was instantly drawn to a dangerously seductive, red-eyed elven woman of pale grey skin and midnight black hair. You took quite the thrashing. I was almost afraid my efforts were wasted. Where am I? Ithelia immediately demanded, mangled powers tensing in a panic. All of her felt sluggish, so much so that even thinking was painful, but she would not allow herself another jail, not again. Within my guest room, of course. Mephala smiled, raising both hands placatingly. It is a bit of a new addition, so do forgive me for the lack of entertainment. A beat of tense silence passed. I was weak enough to be devoured. The Prince of Paths narrowed her eyes, spreading her senses wide enough to realize she was well and truly stuck in the middle of the webweaver's realm. Yet I am still alive. Why? Well now, Mephala clasped her hands and smiled brilliantly. I would say that preserving your life for a potential alliance was simply more efficient, but that would be lying. She leaned in, not an ounce of threat in her movement. The truth is, as they say, more entertaining than fiction, and the way my dear chosen handled you was simply far too inspired to extinguish so swiftly. The near obsession echoing with the title nearly made Ithelia shudder. I see. She accepted everything else far too easily. Entertainment was the reason Daedra did pretty much anything these days. And the reason I was not simply deposited back in my realm. Well, you do still owe me. Mephala smiled and winked, and what better way to pay it all back than joining my little posse, I do believe the word is. The same one who helped you use me as bait and watched as I was tricked by an arrogant spirit, Ithelia asked. And Mephala rose her index finger and pointed it at her. The same one who helped you ensure dearest Hermaeus would meet his end. Do try to keep up, dear. There is only so much slowness one can excuse through battle wounds. Ithelia felt the helplessness. She was far too used to bubbling within her chest, but understood she was nowhere near ready to stand on her own 2 feet just yet, pretending to consider the far too amused arch-schemer's proposition before very slowly nodding. Very well. Am I to remain your guest then? Only until you are recovered enough not to fall over. Mephala clapped her hands cheerfully. Now that that is out of the way. She leaned in. Want to go and bother? She did a pretend cough. Visit my dearest little immortal. I assure you, Nirn has only grown more interesting while Mora was exploring you with his tentacles. Ithelia did shudder this time. Please never phrase it like that again. Like what? Mephala tilted her head. Never mind. Ithelia sighed. you seem to be forgetting the fact one of Akatosh's fully realized children is currently running around with the Chimel Adabal dangling around her neck. That kind of existence usually meant she and those like her were not welcome. Oh, don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Mephala patted said head and dodged out of the reflexive swat without the barest hint of effort. I have a special pass. Is this feeling the reason most mortal wizards never leave their towers? Ethelia pondered as she started considering smashing her head against a wall. Fine, just don't expect me to tolerate you for too long. She was annoyed, not stupid. Excellent, the far too peppy weaver of webs preened, and in a flash they were elsewhere, the Aldmer tower they were in swiftly replaced by an elven palace, one of a variety the Prince of Paths was only vaguely familiar with. Raven's point of view. Greetings once again, my most favorite customer. The Dremora merchant grinned as he was summoned. Zelzaz, I greeted, how is business? Booming as always, thanks to your patronage. The money demon's grin widened. Those Telvanni have deliciously deep vaults once you learn how to pry them open. With fair and honest trade dealings. I narrowed my eyes, even if it felt distinctly heatless. But of course, he clutched at his heart as if horrified, I only offer the best products, and same-day delivery at that. My premium is as always worth every single golden coin. Yes, one of Mephala's own being honest, right? I deadpanned at him, do you have it? Instead of answering, the Dremora opened one of the many drawers of his traveling stand, the far too small container quickly consuming his entire arm as he rummaged through it before he drew a large head-sized ball of shimmering energies from within. It was a bit of a challenge to get my hands on this one. Asking my lady for one would have been far simpler. And deprive you of a lucrative business opportunity. I blink in surprise. How could I ever do that to an honored business partner? Yes. He nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world and pushed the orb forward, one unreasonably stable, fully powered sigil stone straight from Mehrunes' own portal realms as requested. I quickly scanned it to see if it was the real deal. Zelzaz had never cheated me, but I needed to know if its parameters would suffice, and surprisingly enough they would. This will do, I said, more to myself than the Dremora. Most excellent. The demon clapped his hands before looking at me expectantly. Still focused on the orb of power, I snapped my fingers and a long knife enchanted solely by my anti-outsider aspect over the course of a week flopped atop Zelzaz's stand, the Dremora flinching away as he felt the unassuming blade's presence. For the first time since I summoned him all the way back in Winterhold, I saw him gulp in fear, before very delicately using a pair of tongs to lay the weapon into a specially made stand. Satisfied? I quirk an eyebrow as I deposit the sigil stone to my inventory. He startled at my voice and nodded shakily. Completely. I see now why you are so feared. You were at Apocrypha. I deadpan. You already knew that. Ah, but I was too distracted. He composes himself, serving my lady's wishes and all that. Looting Mora's libraries, you mean? My face remains firmly flat. Ah, well. He scratches the back of his head. The spice must flow. Indeed it must, I snort. Do compile all the texts you gathered and bring them with you the next time you are summoned. I will even throw in a bonus if you don't offer them to anyone else beforehand. And his signature greedy grin was back like it had never left. But of course, always happy to serve such a loyal customer. Rolling my eyes, I wave him off and end the summoning. Too bad he was unable to get me more Ethereum, I mutter, still feeling a tad miffed about that fact. But the sigil stone should do. It was used to power an entire interdimensional portal before Ulrika dealt with it. Indeed, my master. Akulakan nods, having remained utterly silent during Zelzaz's visit. Is it time then? Not quite yet. I allow myself a sigh. The great lords have finally managed to schedule a proper council meeting between all the tasks I keep throwing at them, so I have to attend that first. We'll probably have to put out a fire or 10, but such was the life of an absolutist monarch. I see, is all Akulakan said in response. Something told me that if he had the hormones for it, he'd probably be fidgeting in anticipation or due to lack of patience right about now. I went to reassure him, but just then, Out of the corner of the room stepped out a pair of familiar figures, one infinitely more expected than the other. Well now, I cupped my chin as Mephala outright dragged a pathetically weak projection of Ethelia with her, "Isn't this a surprise?" Knowing Mephala, it really shouldn't have been. 509, Chapter 1. 122, Umbral Undertaking. So I clasped my hands as I looked at Ethelia. "You are still alive." My voice may have come off as a bit miffed. "Certainly not thanks to your efforts," she answered blandly. "Can you blame me?" I spread my arms and shrugged. I had other concerns, and frankly our alliance was a temporary one at best. There was simply no way she wouldn't remain pissed at my blackmail for a few thousand years, and that was just too annoying to think about. The two Daedra evidently understood this, and after a few awkward moments, Mephala poked Ethelia's side with an elbow, and she visibly forced herself to answer. "It is all part of the game to us. The fact you managed to do anything to either me or Mora simply means you get to play it." "Uh-huh." I deadpanned and turned to my patron. "How many times did you force her to rehearse that?" "We are beings of unimaginable power and intellect, dear." Mephala chided. It took her only 24. The Weaver of Fates slowly turned to her fellow metaphysical fabric enthusiast and gave her the flattest look she could manage. "I may have accepted your offer, but that does not mean I will tolerate being paraded as a fool." "Oh, do cheer up, my dear." Mephala patted her back, her eternal state of smug amusement resuming undeterred. "No one is ridiculing anyone here. We just like to do things in a more relaxed manner." "Propriety is tiresome." I nod sagely. She beams exactly. "Ethelia doesn't share our enthusiasm. Just get on with it." Mephala pouted but did as she was told, waving for me to lead the way and falling in beside me. "Your suspicions were confirmed. The two idiots are going to support the High Elves." "Unsurprising." I nod, barely reacting to the information. I did do a lot to piss them off, even if my first guess was them trying to scheme their way into an alliance with the other Daedra after our stunt. Can't imagine convincing someone like Namira to help them out would be too difficult. The others are reluctant to draw too much attention to themselves. Mephala's tone was brimming with mockery as she smiled. "Your particular panache has a lot of them both excited and terrified, and no one wants to encourage you into paying them a similar visit, or at least not yet. And the defective duo are too weakened to attack me outside of very specific situations." I conclude, leaving them with but one viable option remaining. "Good, I could use a bit of straightforward right about now. Anything else interesting happen while you snooped?" "Me? Snooping?" She quirked an eyebrow before covering her mouth and tittering. "Well, there was this one moment where the two of them got so very excited, I almost thought they were about to start hate-fucking." The utterly flat delivery of the statement nearly had me choking on air. I slowly turned to face her and immediately fell back on my default settings as I decided I was not going to ask, "Isn't that Molag's natural state, though?" Her eyes radiated amusement as she leaned in, expression shifting into that of someone who was about to reveal the world's secrets to me. "So is Meridia's." Before I even realized it, a snort had already left me, and I was laughing my ass off. Wiping away an imaginary tear, I let out a final chuckle and sighed. That explains far too much. Mephala merely hummed. We passed some guards who did their best impression of a statue. "I have a question. And I may have answers." She smiled, turning back to me after having spent the past few moments observing a curious Ethelia who had been poking Akulakan's shoulder when she thought no one was looking. "You are aware I recently got my hands on Umbra," I say leadingly. "That old thing." She hums. "I had thought dear Clavicus would have retrieved it by now. Things must have shifted more drastically than I expected." Wisely ignoring the implications of that particular statement, I pressed, "Speaking of Mr. Vile, how badly would he react if I used the sword to make another junior?" She didn't answer immediately, giving the automaton an evaluating glance, and Ethelia a knowing one, before turning back to me. "He may be content to watch for a while, so long as you do not break his connection, but expect him to try and retrieve his property at an inopportune moment now that it is more interesting than a soul-eating blade. So make a trap for when he tries." I translate understood. All she does in response is another titter. Before long, we reached the hall leading to the entrance of the council chambers of the Palace of Mauenhold, the 4 honor guards showing no reaction to our presence, as they seemed to have been standing for hours without allowing themselves the slightest moment of laxity. Needless and pedantic? Most certainly. But it was also quite impressive and satisfying in a self-aggrandizing kind of way. I am afraid we will have to part ways for now. I turn to my entourage. I have some actual work to attend to, and the 2 of you may as well enjoy the refurbishments of Mournhold now that the crime in the city has been fully curbed. Not afraid I am going to start a religious riot, Mephala teases. Not your style. I shrug before grinning. But good point, Akula Khan. Please accompany these fine ladies and ensure there are no incidents. The automaton nodded, and I had to hold back a snort at the contrast between my 2 guests, Mephala still looking amused even as she pouted at me, and Ethelia looking like she had swallowed a magically embittered lemon. The scene kept my spirits up through all 4 hours of the meeting. Thank you, Lady Sadras. I gave the old elven woman a nod as she finishes giving me the basics on the current economy of Morrowind. I trust that there are no outlying issues that I need to personally deal with. Not counting the little guild you enabled here in Mournhold, she asked, allowing herself the slightest touch of dryness. I merely gave her an amused look. Then no. Her previous placid expression returned. As I have said, Morrowind as a whole prospers, but all the war preparations you insist on are drawing us dangerously close to falling into debt. The war is, I am afraid, rather necessary. I feel like I have been repeating that far too much in the past 2 hours or so, and while a kingdom falling into debt would be nothing new, I would much prefer if that never happened. Should any specific area need extra funding, I will pay out of my own pocket. Slowing down at this juncture is not something we can afford. Yes, recreating the current excitement among the commoners would be a touch difficult. She nods, but I am afraid that even considering your previous donation to the Treasury, you are underestimating just how expensive things are getting. You did give me the numbers, I point out dryly, but if my word is not enough. She holds back a wince. Then allow me to put my money where my mouth is. I grin. What project is draining the most at the moment? The roads. She answers instantly. Implementing rotating shifts has done marvelously for the tempo of our expansion, but so did it increase the costs of every aspect of the endeavor. Merely transporting foods costs us thousands of septims a day. I hum. And yet I remain firm on my position that proper cobbled roads with good drainage are going to vastly overshadow any number of cities we could found in a few decades, so I steeple my fingers. How much money do I need to throw at the problem before it stops being one? For the foreseeable future, she half asks. At least 3 million gold to get things back on track without cutting other costs. Even Demnevani hisses at the sum. Holding back a cackle at their alarm, I merely summon a scroll and write up an official-looking receipt before levitating it at her. Present this to Karsus. He should be here in the evening and will ensure you get everything you need. The centuries-old merchant woman hesitates before picking the piece of paper up with an almost religious reverence and slowly nodding, I will make sure none of it goes to waste. An undertaking I would not dare take myself. I snort and turn to the rest. Let's see here. Alandro has already reported on public order. Demnevani has been getting his fellow mushroom dwellers organized and even managed an academic meeting between them all. That leaves. Eyeing Anaris Dres, I ask, how goes the rebuilding of Tyr? She was tasked with ensuring the frontier was in good order, but I would be a fool not to accept that rebuilding her capital was the first step on that road, even if it annoyed me how much her entire house fixated on it. Slow and steady, she says with barely contained pride, the harbour will be in working order in 3 months at most. And the fortifications? I raise an eyebrow. Fortifications? She repeats, but we are at peace with the Argonians. I doubt any real number of them are going to be stupid enough to try raiding us. I will remind you that we will sooner rather than later be entering a state of war. I say flatly. Failing to prepare is preparing for failure, and I would not be one bit surprised if a short-sighted but enterprising Thalmor agent decides setting your new home on fire is an excellent way to rise through the ranks. She very nearly startles at that, That is a very fair assessment. Varan Serrano bluntly states, you are on the border of both the kingdom and the empire. Expecting things to go as you will, just because you want to, settle in as soon as possible is unwise. The young woman with a lot to prove almost snaps at the Archmaster of the Redoran, but visibly holds herself back as she realizes everyone else was agreeing with him. Very well, I will see to it that my architects and planners are informed. See that you do. I drawl, and ask Sindril for any extra funding you require, as much as you may wish for Tyr to be a personal project of your house. It is still going to be the most vulnerable settlement in my territory, and it getting raised twice in the same era is simply unacceptable. I can almost taste her desire to protest on simple principle, but if she was that stupid, she never would have become the Grand Magnate, so all she does instead is offer a numb nod and remain silent. Happy we could clear that up, I say with false cheer. Serrano, how goes the rising of the 3rd Legion? The recruitment numbers are as high as we could have hoped. He answers immediately, shoulders firm and scarred face carved of stone. The training camp has already been established around Blacklight, and my most accomplished instructors tell me it will take us only half a year of training before they are not an embarrassment. Will that not be too late? Alandro Inderil asks. The legions stationed at Mournhold and Kraganmore will have already been bloodying themselves on the front lines for months at that point, and they will be taking casualties throughout. Serrano answers bluntly, which is why the Reserve Legion at Blacklight is training a full 25,000 recruits instead of the traditional 15. Yes, Demnavani drawls, some of my more enthusiastic subjects were inspired by our Falmer brethren and have already volunteered to serve as healers for the duration of the training. The compensation offered was intended for that exact result. I shrug and turn back to the Archmaster. Keep up the good work, Serrano. I do not suspect we will enter a total war of attrition, but preparations and failures and all that. Your Grace. He inclines his head. Any other pressing matters that need addressing? I ask the lot of them. Unsurprisingly, the very idea that I would need to personally intervene is taken as a challenge to their skills, and thus I am blessedly left without inane tasks to fulfill. If you are quite certain. I still felt obligated to say, I thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here, dismissed. Balladas, do be sure to join me later. All 5 of them get up from their seats, offer bows or salutes, and leave the throne room. Who could have guessed that a meritocracy could produce actually competent subordinates? I ask aloud with faux amazement. Will wonders ever cease? Snorting, I down the cup of brandy levitating next to me and get up. There was still work to be done. As I approached the summit of my personal tower, I heard voices from within. Please stop that. The familiar voice of Edrasa practically screamed, I am so done with this. Come now, my dear. I will give you one chance to guess who that was. You are so very wound up. What would you master say if he saw you like that? The poor boy would be heartbroken. Choosing this exact moment to enter, I was greeted with the scene of my poor subject currently leaning away from my patron while said demon woman was smiling at her like she was about to devour the poor girl. Balladas was instead sat next to the now very human-looking Ethelia and doing absolutely fuck all while stealing longing glances at my bodyguard. I would say that I prefer my helper for the day unmolested, if you please. I greet them all with a drawl, turning to face the relieved Edrasa. Is everything ready? She is all too happy to move out of Mephala reach and walks over to the center of the room, where a complex magic circle pulsated with ambient energies. I have carved the circle as you have instructed. Some of the principles took me a few tries to get right, but my tests indicate that everything will work as intended. I nod, looking over the very well-made circle. And what tests are those? She hesitates briefly before steadying herself and answering, well, I thought that since the rune matrix you offered as an example was meant for things of much greater complexity, I could simply dumb it down to its least practical level, both in power requirements and materials needed. Continue. I order as I begin correcting the small mistakes on the 9 draining pathways. The efficiency was all kinds of shot, but still excellent work for someone without my sight. Her voice almost cracks under my observation, even as I still do not face her. After a few initial attempts, I managed to reappropriate some Dwemer insights and used your ritual to create an automaton made of stone and powered by a common soul gem. I do not say a thing, too busy carving an entire extra circle around the one she had prepared for stabilization and power containment purposes. The poor thing practically radiates nerves as she forces herself to speak. After my success, I used all the resources I could get my hands on to retrace my steps and increase the complexity and power of my creations. She fidgets and looks to the circle I had modified. This is the result. I turn to face her. She nearly flinches and quirk an eyebrow. Example? For a moment, all she does is blink, before remembering where she was and casting the inventory spell, summoning a large golem made of steel that stood somewhere between tonal magic and enchanting and needed no conjuration to summon. Immediately, I throw a few dozen scans on the thing and find it to be acceptable. Feeling Balladas's own magic take hold, I turn to the Archmagister and raise an eyebrow. He furrows his brow, considers things for what must be a very uncomfortable minute for my retainer, and slowly nods. And so it is decided. I smirk and turn to face her. You may hereby call yourself a master enchanter. Kindly do not embarrass us. And with no further preamble, I toss her an elaborately decorated scroll holding her new title. She just barely manages to catch it, gives me a downright confounded look, and promptly faints, saved from a fall only by her dutiful creation. Balladas and I share a chuckle of amusement, while Mephala merely grins at the scene. Ethelia says absolutely nothing. Thus entertained, I snap my fingers and blast the awakening elf with a wave of restoration, making her jump up with the sudden onrush of energy, and then promptly have the realization of what just happened shoved into her brain. She goes to speak, but I just wave her off. Just get to work. All too happily, she does as she is told, depositing 9 Dremora hearts belonging to some of Molag and Meridia's greatest champions, atop 9 plinths surrounding the ritual circle. Demnevani does nothing, as he had offered me a grand favor for the privilege of observing. I check on the ritual one final time, waiting for the magically induced blood to begin flowing from the hearts before snapping my fingers and summoning the body I had carved from ebony just for this moment. Unlike Akalakan, I went with a more feminine form for this one, even if it was all entirely aesthetic, once more taking inspiration from the same origin as before, but using the parallel organization as the template for her looks. The body was a slender one, still unreasonably resilient, but made for rapid movements and explosive yet precise attacks. Its color scheme made to mirror Akalakan entirely, carrying my usual style of amethyst on ebony. All that was left now was to fill the cavity in its chest and give it a source of personality. I could have theoretically just made a weaker Akalakan like this, with only the sigil stone, but why would I ever limit myself like that? Taking said stone out, I lay it within the automaton's chest and activate the function inscribed within it with a touch of tonal magic, causing it to close in on the swirling vortex of energies with nary a sound. Immediately, a pulse spread through the circle, making it glow an ominous red as the blood began filling the stone grooves. Wasting no more time, I summoned the large case Devaith Fire had given me and opened it, revealing a slender greatsword that looked to be made of silvered ebony within. Immediately I felt an influence begin chipping at the surface of my mind, but sadly for the over-enthusiastic sword soul, I gave it no chances for its usual fuckery, and immediately placed it atop the automaton, laying its 2 hands atop its pommel and making it look like a knight's burial carving. The moment the sword touched its new home, the entire room shuddered, the soul within reacting rather violently to the sudden tugging sensation it felt as it was ripped from the blade and deposited within the crystalline body. The very same body engraved with so much controlling enchantments, I could have probably made her a 10th more powerful without them. But sadly for her future prospects, Umbra had a reputation, and I wasn't about to let a mass murderer loose just to make Akulakan happy. The instant the soul snapped into its automaton shell, it began thrashing, or it would have had I not slammed its mind with a simple but absolute command, cease. And so it did. By this point, Balladas and Idrasa had both found themselves at the edges of the room. The two Daedra not even acknowledging the storm of energies that would have ripped anyone too weak apart in an instant. Me, on the other hand? This was an old game for me, and before things could get too violent, my mental counter reached 0, and all 9 Dremora hearts burst into ashes. The storm of magicka and soul energy sinking into the automaton like so much water through a faucet. You may move. I sent the mental command, and for a moment nothing happened. But then, without a sound, the body jumped up from its laying position, the sword in its grip already moving with such grace it was almost painful to look at. The automaton paused, looked itself over, and then looked at all of us. Interesting. The cold female voice held enough menace to make the less steady void their bowels. But I was anything but afraid as I grinned widely, ignoring the 510, Chapter 1, 123, the approaching storm. The instant my greeting reached her, the air around the slender automaton flickered, and in less time than it would take me to blink, Umbra, the sword, was hovering just an inch above my neck. My eyes meet those of the automaton, my eyebrow rising lazily as if to ask, "Are you done?" Umbra tilts her head, and once more her form blurs, reappearing in front of Yggdrasil, sword poised to impale her through the chest, only to once more stop but an inch away from its target. The automaton ignores the girl's panicked screech and once more tilts her head. That is irritating. For a moment I could have almost sworn she sounded like a child whose toy was taken away. Ignoring those thoughts for now. "Why, thank you," is what I settle on, voice filled with false cheer. Admittedly, it is a bit insulting that you thought I would not create safeguards, but it is always nice to be complimented. She rounds on me with a mechanical precision approaching elegance. Dozens of mages tried before you, and they all failed to shackle me. My expression shifts into a mocking smirk as I innocently shrug. It only takes once. Something in her posture and the way she moved made a small part of me distinctly uncomfortable, but I suspected that is simply what being in the presence of someone bloodier than even myself felt like. The glowing purple eyes narrow for a moment, and so it does. She was not about to press for more information, so it fell to me to move things along. Now that the pleasantries are out of the way, introductions. I point my thumb at myself. I am Hortator Raven Dagoth, your new master. My hand moves to Junior. This is Akulakan the Younger, the prototype of your new state of being, and the one you will be working with the most. She says nothing, eyes roaming from her own new body to his, probably analyzing every difference she could see. Junior, shrugging internally, I look to AK. This is Umbra, mass murderer extraordinaire and one of the greatest sword wielders in existence. His eyes blaze momentarily and he nods. Oh, poor boy is hiding his excitement. Scorch coos in my mind. Rolling my eyes, I turn back to Umbra. You have questions? She nods. You say I will be working with your little metal pet, and there is only one reason why you would seek me out specifically. What possible use can I be to you if I cannot murder as I will? Rather simple, my freshest of subordinates. I grin and point at myself. You will be murdering as I will. Once more she tilts her head, no emotional outbursts, no threats, just an increase in focus. Very well. Excellent. I grin and clap my hands. Akulakan will catch you up on everything else. I seem to be needed elsewhere. Not waiting for her response, I begin walking over to where a downright giddy Baladas is trying to convince, extort Yggdrasil for her new innovation, while Mephala goaded the both of them. Though I do still catch the two automatons' first words to each other. So, my fellow slave. Umbra's voice remained utterly cold, while somehow transferring all her disdain. What is your preferred form of murder? Junior did not answer immediately, actually considering it for a moment. The meatbags crunch nicely when I punch them in the head. A bit basic, but it works. The fact the topic made her animated did not instill confidence. I myself prefer, and it was then that I realized it. The reason her existence made me uncomfortable. The posture, the air around her, and the way she spoke when not sizing someone up. It was Mephala, but horny for murder. Jesus, what a terrifying thought. General P.O.Phi. The webweaver daintily sipped on her tea, eyes closed as she waited for her guest to ask the question. She even made a fine effort of it, not speaking once for a full hour since they returned to the spiral skein, but even beings of their level were not infinitely patient, and Ethelia finally cracked, "Would you finally care to tell me why you dragged me into that waste of time?" Mephalah's eyes opened halfway. "Did you not enjoy yourself, my dear?" Ethelia nearly snapped at her, but still considered the question. "It was fine." And Mephalah smiled behind her cup. "Did you notice anything? Odd?" "Odd?" Ethelia frowned. "Well, the people did seem hopeful and motivated, almost unnaturally so. But that still does not explain why you dragged me through a dozen mortal clothes stores." "Ah, but it explains everything." The weaver of webs opened her eyes fully, depositing her cup on the table and leaning on her elbows. "For it is all the result of one elf." "Your favored pet," Ethelia said icily. "Ah, if only." Mephalah sighed forlornly before quickly shaking her head. "Do keep your biases in check for but a moment and use your dreadful little ability. Tell me, which path was the most likely for the world but 5 years ago?" The Prince of Paths frowned, but acquiesced anyway, closing her eyes and tugging at her still recovering domain. Immediately she saw a world aflame, warlords, necromancers, prophets, and even dragons all ruling their tiny domains. Both the Empire and Dominion being but distant memories after butchering each other to the last, and finally the maddened demigoddess who lit the first fire of it all. Her eyes snapped open, and she was met with the ever-smug face of her host. "That is not the current path," she pointed out uselessly. "And I so wonder why," Mephalah sing-songed. "You've made your point." The crystalline woman very nearly growled, "What do you want from me?" "Merely observe," Mephalah shrugged, oh so very innocently. "Things are going to change in the not-so-distant future, and something tells me you will enjoy what is to come. And if I just so happen to help your favored spirit, then that is just a happy little coincidence, no?" Ethelia asked irritably. "Only if you want to," the dreaded spider lady chirped, eyes shining with mischief as she leaned in. "I would definitely not do everything in my power to direct you towards my preferred outcome. That would be incredibly rude of me, wouldn't it?" Ethelia's face swiftly found its way into her hands as she began regretting ever leaving the damn tree. "You should have just left me in Apocrypha." Too late. As her exterior groaned at the prodding, a small part of the liberated Prince of Paths wondered what arcane trickery she was under, that she was actually beginning to enjoy the irritating Daedra's companionship. Raven's point of view. I held back a wince as I saw Umbra evade a devastating hammer blow, her expert hands already moving into a killing counterattack. And then my premonition was proven correct, as her target merely grabbed the sword with a gauntleted hand, dragged it forward and clutched the automaton's head, throwing her full force against a nearby wall and cracking the heavily enchanted stone surface. The ebony automaton remained crumpled on the ground as its self-repair enchantments went to work. "She is pretty good." Minthara smiled as she stretched, hammer handed over to the ever-attentive Lydia. "Almost took me by surprise." "Almost took her by surprise," she says, Marco mockingly parrots from my left. "I couldn't even see what happened. One moment they are staring at each other, and the next the walls are in need of redecorating." "Skill issue," Minthara fires off without even bothering to look at him. He does stop his halfway raised middle finger as her head ever so slightly moves his way. "So," I clap my hands as Akulakan goes to help his new sibling. "Thoughts?" Minthara plops her armored self next to me, without a care for the poor sofa, and cups her chin. "She will be terrifying to anyone who isn't me or Sarana. Mages will have to actively detect her if they want to counter her before she stabs them." "Exactly my philosophy when designing her body," I nod, smiling in satisfaction. "The poor Altma fucks who haven't left their towers in centuries are going to be in for a delightful surprise." "Sooner rather than later," Minthara mutters. "Oh." I quirk an eyebrow, having returned from Morrowind but an hour ago. "The hidden little embassy we gave the Thalmor." She points in the vague direction of the building unerringly. "They've been rather tense in the past few days. Some of them even look like they are about to run off." "Could be they are simply under pressure from their masters," I posit, knowing it was far too optimistic, and then scoff at my own words. Or maybe you are right and the inevitable is coming. Even if they weren't ready, our legions are, she says, her eyes distant, and initiative is half the battle in war. True enough, I hum, hugging her side and feeling her growing tension deflate somewhat. Playing defense may be tactically advantageous, but defending territory instead of aggressing simply means you are already losing. And we do not lose, she continues firmly. Exactly. I nod, feeling her resolution completely overtake her unease. We do not lose. Not against gods or demons, and certainly not against a bunch of uppity fucking Altmer. Hours later I found myself working in my study, Minthara having decided to properly put Umbra through her paces, and the rest of them remaining to watch the spectacle. I, on the other hand, was currently leafing through Davos's intelligence report. I left the news from High Rock for later, and spoke. So she was right. The Thalmor rumor mill reached them somehow, and they know the war is coming. I look up. The reports of ships bearing the banner of a blue serpent are worrisome, however. Did they actually manage to ally themselves with Pyandonia of all places? Probably just trading with them, boss. Davos shrugs. Things were very hush-hush, so it very well could be some kind of alliance, but Alor said something about the historical precedent, making it almost impossible. Didn't understand half his words, but that is the gist of it. Mind racing with possibilities, I merely voice a non-committal hum. With all the information we possess, he is definitely right. My finger taps the report, but we do not possess all information, now do we? He nods, completely used to that fact, as ironic as it was for a master of spycraft like himself. What do we do then? We can't really post lookouts and call it a day. I frown. I don't know shit about Maormer, except that they are supposed to be blue and are ruled by an immortal moneybag. My tapping increases. I will have to content myself with ensuring Alakim posts more guards at our most important ports. Otherwise, we will simply have to react to what comes. Leave the navying to the navy folks. He nods. He sees me eyeing the final part of the report and shuffles about a bit. The fact they didn't elect a new overlord in 30 years offends me to my core. I grumble, it is going to be held in Castle Alinor, so it isn't like we can do much to fuck with them. That is not entirely correct, Davos corrects me hesitantly. You have an idea? I quirk an eyebrow. Not me. His shoulders sag. Jackal does. By the time he had explained everything, both of us were feeling thoroughly drained of all will. The brilliant yet manic idea Davos spoke of making me question myself more than my actual war crimes and blatant murdering ever did. Didn't stop me from giving my assent, though. The evening of the same day found Minthara and myself within Titus' council chambers once more, the old emperor frowning deeply as he listened to my reports and those of Juculus, who had just finished listing his own reports from the Breton homelands and comparing them with mine. To make a long story slightly less long, the orcs were still killing each other and everyone around them, and somehow growing in number all the while. Uthred was already halfway through Stormhaven, contenting himself with playing peacemaker, while the King of Wayrest lost all credibility. And last, but certainly not least, Daggerfall was playing host to a delegation of Altmer. I could have them all disappeared, I propose, cutting through the silence. Titus considers it briefly before shaking his head. No, it is wiser to use their presence to create conflict between the titular High King and his subjects while our own candidate advances. A few of his councillors give him worried looks, but his face may as well have been carved from stone. Some cities will no doubt burn in the conflict, but I stand by my words. They should have stopped politicking and fought for their rights and liberties, like the rest of us. Marshal Valenicus grunts. Uthred may be another Ponce, but at least he can see that. Let us not have this conversation again, my friends. Francis Vierre clears his throat. My homeland's sophistication has both benefits and detriments. The ensuing stares of disbelief leave him fidgeting as beads of sweat roll down his face. Our course is decided. Titus' voice cuts through the chamber, the old man's presence feeling far sharper than usual. The Hortator's report tells us we have but a month before the Thalmor hold their conclave, after which they will be much harder to take off guard. He looks to me. Marshal Valenicus will be directing our overall strategy. I trust that this will not be an issue. Tilting my head just enough to give said legionary some side-eye, I shrug. His competence was never in question, merely his good social sense. Titus directs me with a withering look, the result of which would surprise no one. He wisely decides to move on. Valenicus, go ahead. Of course, Your Majesty. He stands up, uncovers a large map that had been carved into the table overnight, and begins placing figurines. As of right now, the enemy legion numbers remain the same at 60,000 Alinori soldiers. 2 figurines are placed near Arenthia, northern Valenwood City, and 2 at Riverhold, northern Elsewhere City. Unfortunately, he goes on, placing another 3 Khajiit-looking figurines near the ones at Riverhold. Their auxiliary recruitment efforts have proven fruitful, and around 80,000 Khajiit have joined their ranks. He places 2 less armoured elven figurines near Arenthia. Same goes for Valenwood. 40,000 Bosma have joined the ranks. These numbers are, of course, going to grow over time. Ducalus adds for everyone's benefit. Valenicus grunts an affirmative, yes, and don't forget the home legions of Alinor itself, and presents more figurines, one of whom he places in Anvil. Legion, I will garrison Anvil to protect it from naval invasion. He places another 3 at the western reaches of Bravil. Legions 2, 3, and 4 will be stationed at the Elsewhere border. He places a more rugged figure next to them, Legion Windhelm, and then another, and the Rihard Auxilia will join them. He looks to Minthara and places a dragon figurine next to them. This army will be commanded by General Julius Gracchus, in truth, but will nominally be under the Crown Princess's leadership. Your target is Riverhold. Acceptable, Minthara nods. Valenicus's eyes briefly flash with surprise, but he composes himself quickly enough and moves on. Your proposal for a draconic onslaught is deemed acceptable. However, we ask that you station some of your brethren on the mountains surrounding Cyrodiil to harry enemy lines. That is sensible, she nods. I was not going to take more than 10 with me anyway. Your Highness. He nods and turns to me before pulling out even more figurines and placing 2 more elaborate elven figures, a rugged figure, and a less armoured human figure south of Skingrad. Legions Mournhold, Kragenmoor and Whiterun, and a Cyrodiil volunteer auxilia consisting of some 20,000 non-Legion Guard veterans are to be stationed south of Skingrad. Something told me he was understating the importance of the auxilia troops due to Legion pride. Oh well, more hidden assets for me to throw at the enemy and actually expect to come back alive. What joy! His eyes narrow almost challengingly. The army will nominally be under the leadership of the Prince Consort, while General Servius Tullius holds operational command. Tullius knows what he is doing. I shrug. Poor Valenicus looks almost unhappy that I didn't fight him on this, as she offers a clipped nod. Your target will be Arenthia. Burning trees is a beloved specialty of mine. I grin. The man's face twitches as his instincts tell him something bad was going to happen, but he bravely soldiers on, pulling out 4 more figurines. Another Cyrodiilic auxilia, joined by as many mercenaries as we can scrounge up, will be stationed at Leowin. I nod as he places the 2 figures near the port city, happy that my warning was heard. And finally, the Penitus Oculatus and the Imperial garrison will remain within the Imperial city, both as a reserve and training force, and to keep public order as well as we are able. Commander Maro nods, expression serious. Valenicus pulls out a final piece, looking at it almost reverently. The Knights of the Nine have agreed to join the war effort and will be gathering alongside the other orders. They are to be placed under His Imperial Majesty's direct command, and to be directed as the war requires. Titus absently taps the blade sheathed at his side at all times, his minor tics telling me quite clearly that he wanted to do nothing more than use the legendary sword to incinerate his enemies. As the marshal finishes with his presentation, the Emperor stands, facing each and every one of us, before speaking, I thank you for your dedication. My friends, we shall yet see the dream come true. His eyes blaze with will as the tired war hero settles on one final battle. You have your orders, for the Empire, for Tamriel. For Tamriel. All of us respond. All of us knew much would burn before we were done, but it would all be worth it in the end. Tiberius's father and the leader of the Glory Hound faction. Human legions are around 25,000 strong, anything between soldiers, followers, support staff, etc. Elven legions are 15. Orcs and beasts don't really do legions, but if they did, it would be human adjacent. These numbers are an approximation just there to give you an idea of what Valenicus' ramblings mean. And yes, I know that historical legions were much smaller, but this just clicks better for me.